Welcome to Nocturnal Knowledge. Tonight, we're exploring the history detailed in Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World by Jack Weatherford. Settle in as we journey through the pivotal events and figures that shaped our world. If you enjoy this exploration, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more deep dives into history's most compelling stories. Our journey begins now. The disappearance of Genghis Khan's soul banner and its significance. In 1937, amidst the brutal Stalinist purges that targeted Mongolian culture and religion, the very essence of Genghis Khan's spirit, housed within the sacred soul banner, vanished. This disappearance from the Buddhist monastery in central Mongolia, where lamas had protected it for centuries, marked the end of a profound and ancient tradition. The soul banner, or suld, was far more than merely a flag. It was a warrior spiritual anchor, a conduit to the eternal blue sky the Mongols revered. Crafted from the hair of a leader's finest stallions, tied to a spear shaft, the suld stood in the open air, its horsehair strands catching the wind, the sky, and the sun, channeling their power to the warrior. In death, the banner became the warrior's soul, its streaming hair a beacon, beckoning its owner ever onward, a symbol of his destiny and an eternal inspiration for generations. Genghis Khan possessed two such banners, one of white horses for peacetime and one of black horses for war. The white banner vanished early in history, but the black one, carrying the repository of his soul, survived for centuries. This sacred banner was entrusted to the monastery built by his descendant, the Lama Zanabazar, with the express mission of its protection. For over 1,000 years, through storms, blizzards, invasions, and civil wars, the monks of the Yellow Hat sect of Tibetan Buddhism guarded this banner. Yet they were ultimately no match for the devastating forces of 20th century totalitarian politics. The monks were killed, the monastery ravaged, and the soul banner disappeared, potentially destroyed by the Soviets in a final act of cultural annihilation. The boy who would become Genghis Khan, known as Temujin, was born into a world defined by brutal tribal conflict and extreme scarcity. His early years were marked by abandonment, enslavement, and profound hardship. As the son of an outcast family, his childhood was likely spent in isolation, knowing only a few hundred people and receiving no formal education. This unforgiving environment, however, instilled in him a deep understanding of human emotion, desire, ambition, and cruelty. He learned the stark realities of survival from a young age, experiencing firsthand the violence of tribal raids, kidnapping, and enslavement. He even killed his own older half-brother and endured capture and escape from rivals. These harrowing experiences reveal a nascent instinct for survival, yet offered little to suggest the monumental achievements that lay ahead. He feared dogs and cried easily, overshadowed by a stronger, more skilled younger brother and bullied by his older half-brother. From these degraded circumstances of hunger, humiliation, and slavery, a long and arduous climb to power began. Even before reaching puberty, the foundations of his future were being laid through two crucial relationships. He forged an unbreakable bond of friendship and loyalty with Jamuka, a slightly older boy who would later become his most formidable enemy. Simultaneously, he found Bord, the girl he would love forever, and who would become the mother of emperors. This dual capacity for profound friendship and bitter enmity, forged in youth, became a defining characteristic that endured throughout his life, projecting his personal struggles onto the grand stage of world history. Year by year,
Temujin gradually overcame every adversary more powerful than himself, conquering tribe after tribe on the vast Mongolian steppe. His rise was not marked by formal education or inherited privilege, but a relentless cycle of pragmatic learning, adaptation, and constant revision, driven by a uniquely disciplined mind and focused will. His fighting career began long before many of his future warriors were born, and in every battle he acquired new skills, followers, and techniques. He never fought the same war twice. By the age of 50, an age when most great conquerors have retired from warfare, Genghis Khan's spirit banner, the Sulde, beckoned him from his remote homeland. His destiny expanded beyond the steppes to confront the civilized armies that had for centuries oppressed the nomadic tribes. Following his spirit banner, he led his forces to repeated victories, traversing the Gobi and Yellow River into China, pushing through Central Asia, and crossing the mountains of Afghanistan to the Indus River. In these conquests, the Mongol army transformed warfare into an intercontinental affair, fighting on multiple fronts across thousands of miles. Genghis Khan's innovative techniques rendered heavily armored knights obsolete, replacing them with disciplined, coordinated cavalry. Eschewing fortifications, he masterfully employed speed and surprise, perfecting siege warfare to the point of ending the era of walled cities. He taught his people to fight across incredible distances and to sustain campaigns over decades, influencing warfare for generations. In a mere 25 years, the Mongol army subjugated more lands and people than the Romans had conquered in 400 years. Genghis Khan, alongside his sons and grandsons, controlled the most densely populated civilizations of the 13th century. Measured by people defeated, countries annexed, or sheer area occupied, his conquests surpassed any other man in history by more than double. The empire spanned 11 to 12 million contiguous square miles, an area comparable to Africa or larger than North America combined, stretching from Siberia to India, Vietnam to Hungary, and Korea to the Balkans. Astonishingly, this was achieved by a tribe numbering around 1 million, from which an army of no more than 100,000 warriors was recruited, a force that could fit into a single large sports stadium. The scale of Genghis Khan's achievement is almost unfathomable. Imagine the United States being founded not by educated merchants, but an illiterate slave who through sheer will liberated the land, united its people, created an alphabet, wrote a constitution, established religious freedom, invented new warfare, marched an army across continents, and opened free trade routes. This is the magnitude of Genghis Khan's accomplishments, challenging imagination and scholarly explanation. Genghis Khan's architecture was not in stone, but in nations. He consolidated smaller kingdoms into larger states, unifying Slavic principalities into Russia and forging China by integrating diverse territories. He dismantled aristocratic privilege, building a meritocracy based on loyalty and achievement. The Silk Route towns were revitalized into history's largest free trade zone. Taxes were lowered and abolished for essential professions like doctors and priests. He established a census and the first international postal system. His empire redistributed wealth, created international law, and asserted the supremacy of the eternal blue sky, holding rulers accountable like the lowest herder. He granted religious freedom, demanded total loyalty, abolished torture, and instituted diplomatic immunity for all envoys. The foundation he laid was so strong that his empire grew for 150 years, and his descendants ruled for 7 centuries, leaving a legacy that profoundly shaped the modern world, influencing everything from global commerce and communication to systems of law and governance. His impact was not merely military, it was transformative, setting the stage for a more interconnected and globally aware humanity.
The vastness of the Mongol Empire, forged in the crucible of Genghis Khan's vision, stretched across continents, redrawing the very map of the world. But its legacy was not solely etched in conquest, it was built in the very fabric of nations, the arteries of commerce, and the framework of law. As Genghis Khan's cavalry charged across the 13th century, he didn't just defeat kingdoms, he consolidated them. His architecture found not in stone, but in the very existence of nations. In Eastern Europe, a dozen Slavic principalities and cities were unified into a single larger Russian state. In East Asia, over 3 generations, the Mongols wove together the remnants of the Sung dynasty in the south with the lands of the Jurchen in Manchuria, Tibet to the west, the Tangut Kingdom adjacent to the Gobi, and the Uyghur lands of eastern Turkestan, forging the country of China. Nations like Korea and India, with borders largely fashioned by their Mongol conquerors, have survived to modern times. The Mongol Empire became the nexus for a global awakening, connecting and amalgamating disparate civilizations into a new world order. At the time of Genghis Khan's birth, the Old World was a collection of regional civilizations, largely unaware of their distant neighbors. China knew nothing of Europe, and Europe nothing of China. Yet by the time of his death in 1227, Genghis Khan had connected these worlds with diplomatic and commercial ties that remained unbroken. He dismantled the feudal system of aristocratic privilege, replacing it with a new and unique system based on individual merit, loyalty, and achievement. The disjointed trading towns along the Silk Route were organized into history's largest free trade zone. Taxes were lowered for everyone and abolished entirely for vital professions like doctors, teachers, priests, and educational institutions. He instituted the first international postal system, complete with a regular census, ensuring swift and reliable communication across the vast expanse of his domain. This was not an empire that hoarded wealth. Instead, goods acquired in combat were widely distributed, re-entering the commercial circulation. At its heart lay a commitment to international law, recognizing the ultimate, supreme law of the eternal blue sky over all people. Genghis Khan, a stark contrast to many rulers who considered themselves above the law, insisted that laws held rulers as accountable as the lowest herder. Torture was abolished, yet major campaigns were mounted to eradicate bandits and assassins. He refused to hold hostages, instituting instead the novel practice of granting diplomatic immunity to all ambassadors and envoys, even those from hostile nations with whom he was at war. The empire he left behind was built on a foundation so firm that it continued to grow for another 150 years. Even after its collapse, his descendants ruled smaller empires and large countries for 7 centuries, from Russia, Turkey, and India to China and Persia. Vestiges of his reign persisted, with his descendants holding titles as Khan, Emperor, Sultan, King, Shah, Emir, and even the Dalai Lama. As the Mughals, they reigned in India until 1857, and the last ruling descendant, Alim Khan, Emir of Bukhara, remained in power in Uzbekistan until deposed by the Soviet Revolution in 1920. The legacy of Genghis Khan was not just one of military might, but of a fundamentally transformed world, a global awakening driven by his revolutionary approach to governance, commerce, and law.
The scale of Genghis Khan's conquests, redrawing the world map. Genghis Khan's empire was not built of stone, but of nations. His conquests fundamentally reshaped the political landscape of the known world, consolidating disparate kingdoms into vast, interconnected entities. In Eastern Europe, the Mongols forged a unified Russian state from a dozen fragmented Slavic principalities and cities. Across Eastern Asia, over 3 generations, they created modern China by weaving together the remnants of the Sung dynasty, the Jurchen lands of Manchuria, Tibet, the Tangut Kingdom adjacent to the Gobi, and the Uyghur lands of eastern Turkestan. Nations like Korea and India, in roughly their present-day borders, owe their very formation to their Mongol conquerors. At the time of Genghis Khan's birth in 1162, the Old World was a tapestry of regional civilizations, each with little knowledge of its neighbors. China was unaware of Europe, and Europe had no inkling of China. Journeys between them were virtually non-existent. By the time of his death in 1227, Genghis Khan had forged diplomatic and commercial connections that would endure, linking these worlds together. His empire connected and amalgamated the myriad civilizations around him, ushering in a new world order. The scale of his achievements is staggering. His army subjugated more lands and people in 25 years than the Romans had in 400. Genghis Khan, alongside his sons and grandsons, conquered the most densely populated civilizations of the 13th century. Whether measured by the total number of people defeated, the sum of annexed countries, or the occupied area, his conquests dwarfed those of any other individual in history. The hooves of the Mongol horses splashed in the waters of every river and lake from the Pacific Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. At its zenith, the empire spanned an astonishing 11 to 12 million contiguous square miles, an area comparable to the continent of Africa and significantly larger than North America, including Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean combined. It stretched from Siberian tundra to Indian plains, from Vietnamese rice paddies to Hungarian wheat fields, and from Korea to the Balkans. Astonishingly, this was accomplished by a Mongol tribe that numbered only around 1 million people. His army, drawn from this population, rarely exceeded 100,000 warriors, a force that could comfortably fit within today's largest sports stadiums. Consider the analogy. Imagine the United States being founded not by merchants or planters, but by an illiterate slave. This individual, through sheer force of personality, charisma, and determination, would have had to liberate America from foreign rule, unite his people, create an alphabet, write a constitution, establish universal religious freedom, invent a new system of warfare, march an army from Canada to Brazil, and open arteries of commerce across continents in a free trade zone. This, in essence, is the scale of Genghis Khan's accomplishments, challenging the very limits of imagination and scholarly explanation. Genghis Khan's architecture was not in stone, but in nations. He dismantled the feudal system of aristocratic privilege, replacing it with a meritocracy of loyalty and achievement. He revitalized the languishing Silk Route towns, organizing them into history's largest free trade zone. He lowered taxes for everyone and abolished them for vital professions like doctors, teachers, priests, and educational institutions. He established the first international postal system and a regular census. His was not an empire that hoarded wealth. Instead, he distributed captured goods, ensuring they re-entered commercial circulation. He created an international law, recognizing the ultimate supremacy of the eternal blue sky over all people. At a time when rulers considered themselves above the law, Genghis Khan insisted that rulers be as accountable as the lowliest herder. He granted religious freedom, demanded total loyalty, abolished torture, and instituted diplomatic immunity for all envoys, even those from hostile nations. The foundation Genghis Khan laid was so firm that his empire continued to grow for another 150 years. His descendants, ruling smaller empires and large countries for centuries afterward, held titles as varied as Khan, Emperor, Sultan, king, shah, emir, and Dalai Lama. Some reigned in India as Mughals until 1857. The last of his direct ruling descendants, Alim Khan, the emir of Bukhara, remained in power in Uzbekistan until deposed by the Soviet Revolution in 1920. Genghis Khan's legacy was not merely one of conquest, but of connection. He redrew the world map, not with lines on parchment, but by forging new political realities. He established an empire that for the first time in history linked disparate civilizations, fostering an unprecedented exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies that laid the groundwork for the modern world.
For centuries, the name Genghis Khan has conjured images of unbridled savagery, a bloodthirsty conqueror who reveled in destruction for its own sake. His hordes, often depicted as savage beasts, are seen as a force of primal terror, lusting only after gold, women, and blood. This one-dimensional caricature, a stereotype of the barbarian and the ruthless conqueror, became the prevailing portrait of Genghis Khan, and by extension, of the Asian people themselves. This menacing image, perpetuated through later books and films, stands in contrast stark to the assessments of those who encountered him and his empire in its nascent stages. Geoffrey Chaucer, writing in the late 13th century, spoke of Genghis Khan with undisguised awe, calling him of so great renown that there was nowhere in no region so excellent a lord in all things. Similarly, 13th century scientist Roger Bacon recognized that the Mongol success was not merely due to martial superiority, but rather by means of science. He observed that while they were eager for war, they also devote their leisure to the principles of philosophy. This stark divergence in perception begs a crucial question. How did the man praised by Chaucer and Bacon become the universally reviled figure of modern imagination? The answer lies in the very nature of historical memory and the power of narrative construction, particularly when faced with a deliberate absence of personal representation. Genghis Khan never allowed his portrait to be painted, his image sculpted, or his likeness engraved on a coin. With no contemporary visual records, the world was left to imagine him as it wished. When portraits did emerge centuries later, each culture projected its own fears and biases. The Chinese saw him as an avuncular sage, the Persians as a Turkish sultan, and the Europeans as the quintessential barbarian, his visage fixed and cruel. This lack of definitive visual or biographical material created a void that scholars and detractors alike filled with conjecture and myth. With so little reliable information on his origins, character, or motivations, unsubstantiated rumors took root. Chinese and Persian historians alluded to a secret document, an authentic chronicle guarded and concealed from outsiders, a text that many later scholars came to believe never existed. In its absence, fears and phobias were projected onto the blank canvas of Genghis Khan's life. As centuries passed, the atrocities committed by men like Alexander, Caesar, Charlemagne, and Napoleon were weighed against their accomplishments and their purported historical missions. Yet for Genghis Khan and the Mongols, their transformative achievements were gradually forgotten, while their alleged crimes and brutality were magnified. By the Enlightenment, Voltaire, in his play The Orphan of China, portrayed Genghis Khan not as a visionary leader, but as a destructive tyrant, a wild Scythian soldier bred to arms and practiced in the trade of blood, driven by a base barbarian desire to ravish and destroy. He became the stereotype of the savage, the symbol of all that lay beyond the civilized pale. This negative image was further weaponized by subsequent generations. The names adopted by the Mongols, Tartar, Tatar, Mughal,
Each carried an odious curse. 19th century scientists seeking to classify human populations labeled Asian and American Indian peoples as Mongoloid. Doctors attempting to explain the birth of retarded children to mothers of the superior white race pointed to the children's facial characteristics as obvious proof of ancestry tainted by a Mongol warrior's rape. Even the richest capitalists who flaunted anti-democratic values were derided as Moguls, a term derived from the Persian name for Mongols. In essence, the Mongols and their founder became scapegoats for the failures and shortcomings of other nations. Russia blamed its technological lag on the terrible Tartar yoke. Persia pointed to the Mongols as the cause of its destroyed irrigation systems. China attributed its decline to Mongol and Manchu exploitation. India blamed its inability to resist British colonization on the rapacious greed of Mughal rule. In the 20th century, Arab politicians assured their followers that they would have invented the atomic bomb if only the Mongols had not burned their libraries and leveled their cities. Even as recently as 2002, Taliban fighters equating the American invasion of Afghanistan with the Mongol invasions massacred Hazara, descendants of Mongol armies who had lived in Afghanistan for 8 centuries. Saddam Hussein, in his final addresses to the Iraqi people, echoed similar charges against the Mongols as the Americans moved to invade his country. Amidst this relentless rhetoric, pseudoscience, and scholarly imagination, the truth of Genghis Khan's legacy remained buried, seemingly lost to posterity. His homeland, the very cradle of his power, remained sealed off by 20th century communists, preserving its isolation as effectively as had his own warriors centuries before. The original Mongolian documents, the secret history of the Mongols, had not only disappeared, but faded into the depths of history more mysteriously than Genghis Khan's tomb itself. The truth of Genghis Khan, the builder of the largest contiguous empire in history, the unifier of disparate tribes and the architect of a global awakening of trade and culture, remained submerged beneath centuries of deliberate distortion and willful ignorance. His legacy was not of conquest alone, but of connection, innovation, and the creation of a world order that for a time transcended the divisions that had long plagued humanity. The story of the missing conqueror is the story of how history itself became its scapegoat.
The rediscovery of Genghis Khan, the secret history and modern research. Genghis Khan, the very soul of the Mongol Empire, was once thought to have vanished. In 1937, during the brutal Stalinist purges that decimated Mongol culture and religion, the embodiment of Genghis Khan's soul, a sacred spirit banner, or solda, made from the hair of his finest horses, disappeared from a Buddhist monastery in Mongolia. This loss, coupled with centuries of enforced secrecy and deliberate misrepresentation, meant that for a long time, the true story of Genghis Khan was shrouded in myth, distorted by fear, and ultimately missing from the world's historical narrative. The Mongols themselves believed that a warrior's spirit resided in his spirit banner after death. Genghis Khan possessed two, one of white horses for peacetime and one of black horses for war. The black banner, in particular, was revered as the repository of his soul. This banner, protected for centuries by devoted monks, ultimately fell victim to the totalitarian politics of the 20th century. Its disappearance, along with the widespread destruction of monasteries and the execution of 30,000 Mongols, represented a devastating assault on their history and identity. Genghis Khan's own rise from obscurity is a testament to his extraordinary will. Born into an outcast family on the harsh steppes, a child who feared dogs and cried easily, he endured murder, kidnapping, and slavery.
Yet from these degraded circumstances, he learned the full spectrum of human emotion, forging an unyielding determination to survive and to shape his own fate. His early life was marked by betrayal and hardship, but also by the formative bonds of friendship and love that would define his character throughout his life. While many conquerors have left monuments of stone, Genghis Khan's architecture was etched in nations. By consolidating smaller kingdoms into larger, more stable entities, he redrew the world map. His empire, stretching from Siberia to India and Korea to the Balkans, connected disparate civilizations that had previously known little of each other. By the time of his death in 1227, he had forged diplomatic and commercial links that endure to this day. He championed religious freedom, established an international postal system, and insisted on the rule of law, holding rulers accountable even to themselves. Yet despite these monumental achievements, the world's perception of Genghis Khan was largely shaped by rumor and prejudice. Lacking contemporary portraits, his image was projected differently by each culture. The Chinese saw a sage, the Persians a sultan, and the Europeans a terrifying barbarian. This Mongol secrecy, intended to protect their lineage and their sacred lands, inadvertently created a void that later detractors filled with exaggerated tales of atrocities. The Enlightenment thinkers, like Voltaire, portrayed him as a destructive tyrant driven by base desires. In the centuries that followed, the name Mongol became a curse, associated with scientific classifications of inferiority and used as a scapegoat for national failures. The rediscovery of Genghis Khan began with the deciphering of the secret history of the Mongols. This vital document, written in a coded language using Chinese characters to represent 13th century Mongolian sounds, remained inaccessible for centuries. Scholars had rumored its existence, but its recovery and deciphering in the 19th and 20th centuries, despite being a dangerous endeavor under communist rule, offered a chance to correct the historical record. This underground movement, fueled by a longing for a true Mongol perspective, saw the secret history as a revelation, a voice from Genghis Khan himself offering hope and inspiration. The collapse of communism in 1990 finally opened Mongolia's borders, allowing access to the land of Genghis Khan's birth and burial, the Great Taboo. This pristine area, sealed off for centuries by Soviet military occupation and earlier by Mongol tradition, became a crucial site for modern research. Teams of scholars, including anthropologists, archaeologists, linguists, and geographers, embarked on a meticulous on-the-ground analysis, comparing the secret history with geographical locations and historical accounts. This painstaking work, often conducted under extreme conditions, allowed for a deeper understanding of the events and the motivations of Genghis Khan and his people. By combining traditional archaeological methods with modern technology like satellite imagery, and by collaborating with local herders whose knowledge of the land was invaluable, researchers could finally piece together the fragmented narrative. This rediscovery process, spanning decades of dedicated effort, has begun to peel back the layers of myth and prejudice, revealing the true Genghis Khan, a pragmatic genius, a visionary leader, and a foundational figure whose impact on the modern world is only now being fully appreciated. His rediscovery is not merely an academic exercise, it is a crucial step in understanding the complex tapestry of global history and the making of our interconnected world.
On an isolated, bald hillock overlooking the remote Onon River, in the spring of 1162, under the year of the horse, a boy was born destined to change the course of world history. His mother, Holan, a young kidnapped girl, labored far from the world she knew, surrounded by strangers. This place, beside the Onon River, a tributary of the vast Argonne and a part of the Khenti mountain range, was the geographic heart of the Mongol world. Though only about 10,000 feet above sea level, these ancient mountains, smoothed by millennia of erosion, fed a series of small rivers that flowed out onto the steppes. These steppes, when blessed with rain, shimmered with grass as green as emeralds, but in harsh years could remain a burned brown for consecutive seasons. Holen's life had been violently interrupted weeks earlier. She had been journeying with her first husband, Chilidu, of the Merket tribe, when they were ambushed by 3 brothers from the Bordogin clan. Too poor to afford a bride price or perform the traditional bride service, the brothers resorted to kidnapping. Chilidu, attempting to draw the attackers away from Holen and her ox cart, was pursued. Holen, realizing that fleeing with Chilidu would lead to their capture and his death, made the fateful decision to surrender to her kidnappers. She thrust her blouse at him, a poignant token of her love and a deeply symbolic gesture in steppe culture, where breath and aroma were thought to carry a part of the soul. Chilidu fled, clutching the blouse, his gaze lingering on Holen until she vanished from sight. Holen's captor and new husband was Yasuge, a man from a small and at that time insignificant band that would one day be known as the Mongols. He was already married to another woman, Xochitl, with whom he had a son. Holen, likely no more than 16, would have to struggle for her place within this new family. Her new life was a stark contrast to the abundant diet of meat and milk she knew from the open grasslands. Yasuge's tribe subsisted on the northern edge of the herding world, where steppes met wooded mountains and grasslands were scarce. Holen's diet would now consist of harsher hunters' foods, marmots, rats, birds, and the occasional deer. For the Bordogin clan, she was little more than captured chattel. The legend surrounding the birth of Holen's son, the future Genghis Khan, speaks of an ominous sign. It is said that the boy, struggling into the world, tightly clutched something mysterious and ominous in the fingers of his right hand. His young mother, gently prying back his fingers, discovered a large black blood clot the size of a knuckle bone. From the warm confines of her mother's womb, this boy, grasping the blood clot, had brought it with him into this world. What could an inexperienced, lonely young girl, a captive far from her homeland, make of this strange sign in her son's hand? More than 8 centuries later, we still grapple with the same questions. Did the blood clot represent a prophecy or a curse? Did it foretell good fortune or evil? Shortly after kidnapping Holen, Yasuge had been on a campaign against the Tatars and killed a warrior named Temujin Uge. Returning home just after his son's birth, Yasuge named his son Temujin, a name that carried significant symbolism, potentially hinting at the lingering enmity between Mongols and Tatars. The name itself may have been chosen to impart character, fate, and destiny. The common root of the verb temul occurred in several Mongol words meaning to rush headlong, to be inspired, or to have a creative thought, a name perhaps best exemplified by the determined look in the eye of a horse racing where it wants to go, no matter the rider's will. Temujin's father, Yasuge, left behind 2 wives and 7 children under the age of 10. Tragically, Temujin's father was poisoned by Tatars, leaving the family vulnerable. The Taichiyud clan, who had previously dominated Yasuge's Bordogin clan, now saw no use for the widows and their children. Deserted and facing starvation, Holen's family was forced to survive on the very edge of existence, relying on roots, small animals, and what they could scavenge. Temujin, a boy no more than 10 years old, witnessed the callousness of his own clan, the Taichiyud,
who speared an old man for daring to question their desertion of Holin's family. In a display of fierce determination, Holin, grabbing the spirit banner of her dead husband, chased after the clan, waving the banner over her head, shaming them into briefly returning. But that night, the Taichiud snuck away, taking the family's animals, condemning them to a nearly certain winter death. The family, however, did not die. Holin, with extraordinary strength and resilience, saved them. She ran up and down the river searching for food, while Temujin, using sharpened bones to fashion arrows on the steppe. Later, he bent his mother's sewing needles into fish hooks. These desperate, isolated struggles shaped Temujin's character, instilling in him a profound determination to defy the strict caste structure of the steppes, to take charge of his own fate, and to rely on alliances with trusted associates rather than kinship or tribe. These formative experiences, born from a blood clot in his hand and a fateful name, were the crucible in which the future Khan was forged.
Born into the harsh, unforgiving expanse of the Eurasian steppe, Temujin's early life was a crucible of hardship, a stark prelude to the monumental empire he would one day forge. The very circumstances of his mother, Hoyulin's life, were defined by violence and displacement. Kidnapped from her first husband, Chiledu of the Merkid tribe, by Yasuge, a chieftain of the Borojin clan, Hoyulin's destiny was irrevocably altered. This brutal act, a common, albeit tragic, occurrence in the tribal rivalries of the time, set the stage for Temujin's own tumultuous beginnings. The narrative of Hoyulin's abduction paints a poignant picture of survival. At a tender age, possibly just 16, she was traveling with Chiledu toward his homeland when they were ambushed by Yasuge and his brothers. Chiledu, attempting to draw the attackers away from Hoyulin's cart, was pursued, while Hoyulin, with remarkable foresight and courage, convinced her husband to flee alone, understanding that a joint escape would doom them both. She chose to surrender to her captors, imparting a poignant farewell to Chiledu with a piece of her blouse, a potent symbol of her lingering affection and identity in the face of an unknown future. Yasuge, though impoverished and part of a minor clan, was Temujin's father. Hoyulin was forced into a life with Yasuge, already possessing a wife and son, Xochitl. Her new existence on the northern fringes of the herding world, where grassland was scarce and subsistence relied heavily on hunting smaller animals, was a stark contrast to the more abundant life she had known. The Mongols at this time were often viewed as scavengers, subsisting on what they could hunt or seize from more prosperous tribes, animals and women alike. Hoyulin, then, was little more than captured chattel, her position within Yasuge's family tenuous. It is during these early years, the fragments of which are primarily preserved in the secret history of the Mongols, that Temujin, as Hoyulin's first child by Yasuge, was born. Legend holds that he entered the world clutching a large, dark blood clot in his hand, an omen interpreted with a mixture of pride and apprehension by his young, uncertain mother. This enigmatic symbol, whether prophecy or curse, would echo through his life, a potent reminder of the darkness and the potential for power intertwined within his destiny. Temujin, later known as Genghis Khan, was named for Temujin Uge, a Tartar warrior killed by his father, Yasuge, shortly before Temujin's birth. The name itself, linked to roots meaning to rush headlong or to be inspired, perhaps foreshadowed the spirited and ambitious nature that would define his life. His father, Yasuge, seemingly sensing a future rivalry between Temujin and his half-brother Bektar, made a critical decision that would tragically shape his family. At the tender age of 8, Yasuge took Temujin on a journey to find a wife for him. This journey, intended perhaps to forge an alliance with Hoyulin's family and remove Temujin from the escalating rivalry at home, took a fateful turn. Along the way, Yasuge encountered the Tartars, with whom he had a blood feud. Despite his efforts at disguise, he was recognized and poisoned. On his deathbed, Yasuge's last request was for Temujin to be brought back to the family encampment. The boy arrived to find his father dead, leaving behind 2 wives and 7 young children. The clan, the Taichud, who had previously dominated Yasuge's Borijin clan, now saw little need for his abandoned family. The message of their abandonment came starkly through the denial of participation in the annual ceremonial meal honoring the family's ancestors, a profound symbolic severing of ties. As the clan prepared to move, deserting Hoyulin and her children, Temujin, then no more than 10 years old, witnessed a brutal act of betrayal when one of the Taichud speared an old man who dared to object to their abandonment. The boy's helpless grief and anger at this injustice, coupled with his mother Hoyulin's courageous defiance, her raising of her dead husband's spirit banner to shame the deserting clan into a temporary return, left an indelible mark. The family thus cast out and with no protector was left to fend for itself. The resilience of Hoyulin, who scoured the riverbanks for roots and fruits, and the resourcefulness of young Temujin, who fashioned bone arrows to hunt rats and bent needles into fishhooks, speak volumes of their desperate struggle for survival. Giovanni, a Persian chronicler, would later describe them wearing clothing of the skins of dogs and mice, and their food was the flesh of those animals and other dead things. From these degraded circumstances, hunger, humiliation, enslavement, and the constant threat of death, the boy who would become Genghis Khan began his long, arduous climb to power. The profound traumas of his early life instilled in him a deep distrust of established hierarchies and a fierce determination to control his own fate, relying on alliances forged through loyalty rather than the constraints of kinship. His dual capacity for friendship and enmity, forged in the crucible of his youth, would become the defining trait of his character, shaping not only his personal life, but projecting onto the grand stage of world history.
In the unforgiving expanse of the 12th century steppe, amidst a world defined by constant tribal warfare, a profound and fateful bond was forged between 2 boys, Temujin, who would become Genghis Khan, and Jamuka. Their shared youth, spent hunting, fishing, and wrestling on the frozen Onan River, was a rare pocket of joy in Temujin's otherwise harsh existence. Twice as children, they swore an oath of eternal brotherhood, becoming Andas, a bond considered stronger than that of biological kin, for it was a tie chosen freely. Jamuka, born into the Jadaran clan, a distant relation of Temujin's father, would become Temujin's sole Anda in his life. This childhood intimacy, however, was destined to fracture, evolving into a decades-long bitter rivalry that would plunge all the Mongol tribes into a devastating civil war. Their burgeoning brotherhood was built on mutual respect and shared dreams of leading their people.
They exchanged gifts, symbolizing their bond. Jamuka gifted Temujin a knucklebone, a rare treasure inlaid with brass, while Temujin gave Jamuka an arrowhead crafted from cypress. These were not mere toys. They were adult gifts, imbued with the promise of future alliance. Their oaths deepened with the ritualistic exchange of arrowheads, one designed to whistle, the other elegantly crafted. Like hunters communicating secretly across distances, Temujin learned to use the whistling arrow, a skill that would later prove invaluable in military maneuvers. The exchange of blood, by swallowing a small amount of each other's, signified an exchange of souls, a profound merging of their identities. Yet even in these formative years, the seeds of discord were sown. Temujin, as evidenced by his earlier killing of his half-brother Begtar rather than submit to dominance, harbored a deep-seated aversion to being treated as an inferior. As their clans camped near each other on the Onan River, the distant kinship between Temujin and Jamuka was understood through the lens of bones, lineages tracing their ancestry. Jamuka, descending from the firstborn son of their common ancestor, a steppe herder, claimed a higher lineage than Temujin, who descended from Bodanchar the Fool, a forest hunter known for kidnapping women. This perceived hierarchy, amplified by Jamuka's increasing tendency to treat Temujin less like an Anda and more like a subordinate younger brother, began to strain their relationship. The breaking point came in the spring of 1181. Jamuka, asserting his authority as the leader of the more prestigious horse-herding lineage, ordered Temujin, identified with the less esteemed sheep-herding lineage, to move his camp closer to the river, while Jamuka would camp nearer the mountains. This perceived insult, a clear assertion of Jamuka's superior status, was too much for Temujin. Advised by his determined wife, Borta, Temujin and a contingent of Jamuka's followers secretly fled, marking the beginning of their fateful division. What had once been a brotherhood, forged in childhood innocence, devolved into a bloody feud that would engulf the Mongol world for a quarter of a century, as each man strove to dominate the fractured tribes. Their personal rivalry would become a crucible, testing the very foundations of the Mongol society, and ultimately paving the way for Temujin's eventual rise to unparalleled power.
The rise of Temujin, early battles and the formation of the Mongol nation. Born into the brutal crucible of the 12th century steppe, the boy who would become Genghis Khan, known then as Temujin, emerged from a childhood of hardship and exile. Abandoned by his father's clan after Yasugai's murder, Temujin and his family were left to fend for themselves, cast out from the protection of their kin. Hunger, humiliation, and the constant threat of violence were his companions. Yet within this unforgiving landscape, the seeds of an extraordinary destiny were sown. Temujin's early life was a testament to survival. From the grim circumstances of his outcast family, he learned the harsh realities of the steppe, the necessity of alliances, the sting of betrayal, and the unforgiving nature of power. Even as a child, he demonstrated a remarkable capacity for leadership and a fierce determination that belied his youth. His early relationships, particularly his sworn brotherhood with Jamuka, would forge bonds of loyalty that were as profound as they were ultimately fraught with conflict. These childhood experiences, marked by profound loss and struggle, instilled in him a deep-seated resilience and a strategic mind that would later redefine warfare and governance.
The fragmented world of the steppe tribes was a constant theater of conflict, where shifting alliances and raiding parties were as predictable as the changing seasons. Temujin, even in his youth, navigated this treacherous terrain with a precocious understanding of both diplomacy and force. His early battles were not grand campaigns of conquest, but rather desperate struggles for survival, for his family, and for the meager resources that could sustain them. These skirmishes, often against rival clans and even members of his own extended family, honed his skills in leadership, strategy, and the art of inspiring loyalty. A pivotal moment in his formative years was the kidnapping of his wife Borta by the Merkid tribe. This profound personal violation galvanized Temujin, compelling him to confront his own limitations and seek the aid of powerful allies. His alliance with Turgil, the Ong Khan of the Kriad, proved instrumental, demonstrating Temujin's ability to forge relationships that transcended traditional kinship ties. Together, with Jamuka also contributing his forces, they launched a successful raid to reclaim Borta, a victory that bolstered Temujin's reputation and solidified his nascent leadership. However, the fragile peace was short-lived. The inherent rivalries among the steppe tribes, exacerbated by Temujin's rising influence and his increasingly sophisticated organizational methods, soon led to open conflict with his former friend, Jamuka. Their rivalry became a defining feature of Temujin's rise, representing a clash between the old aristocratic order, rooted in lineage and inherited power, and Temujin's emerging system based on merit, loyalty, and demonstrable ability. Temujin's triumph over clans like the Taichiud and the Jurchen, not only through military prowess, but also through his innovative policies of incorporating conquered peoples into his own tribe, marked a crucial turning point. He began to dismantle the old tribal structures, replacing them with a more unified organization centered around his personal authority. By 1189, at the age of 27, Temujin had gained enough support to be proclaimed Khan of the Mongols. This was not yet a unified nation, but the foundation had been laid. His early campaigns against the Tatars, not only for their wealth, but also for their perceived betrayal of his father, further cemented his position. These victories were more than just military triumphs. They were about demonstrating a new way of life. Temujin introduced radical reforms, prioritizing the collective good and the fair distribution of spoils, ensuring that even the families of fallen warriors were provided for. He fostered an environment where loyalty and skill, not birthright, determined advancement, a revolutionary concept on the steppe. The ultimate consolidation of his power came through a series of strategic victories and the systematic dismantling of his rivals. The defeat of the Naiman, the Merkid, and finally, the capture and execution of his lifelong rival Jamuka marked the end of the old order. In 1206, at the age of 43, Temujin, now known as Genghis Khan, convened a grand Kurultai, a council of all the Mongol tribes, at the headwaters of the Anan River. There, amidst the sacred mountains of his homeland, he was proclaimed the Great Khan, the supreme ruler of a newly forged Mongol nation. This marked the birth of an empire, forged not just through conquest, but through the unification of disparate tribes under a single banner, a common law, and a shared vision. A testament to the extraordinary rise of Temujin from an outcast child to the founder of a new world order.
The nascent Mongol nation, forged in the crucible of intertribal warfare, stood on the precipice of transformation. Yet mere unity of the nomadic tribes was not enough. To conquer the world, Temujin, now Genghis Khan, needed a system that could bind his diverse people into a singular, disciplined force. This was the genesis of the decimal organization, a revolutionary concept that would redefine not only warfare, but the very fabric of Mongol society. The nomadic existence, characterized by small, mobile groups, lent itself naturally to organization based on units of 10. Genghis Khan took this existing structure and molded it into something unprecedented, a standing army and a governing framework for his entire nation. Every healthy male, from 15 to 70, was integrated into this system. 10 men formed an arban, bound by oaths of brotherhood to live and fight together, their loyalty to each other and their commander absolute. 10 arbans formed a zagun of 100, led by a selected commander. 10 zaguns became a minghan of 1,000, and 10 minghans formed a tumen of 10,000. The leaders of these units, from the smallest to the largest, were chosen not by birthright or kinship, but by ability and proven loyalty. This radical departure from traditional step hierarchy, where lineage dictated power, placed the lowest-born individual with talent at the forefront, ensuring that the army and administration were staffed by the most capable. This decimal organization was more than just a military tactic. It was a fundamental restructuring of society. Each unit, from the arban to the tumen, was a self-contained administrative entity mirroring Genghis Khan's own household. It extended beyond the battlefield, integrating all members of the tribe, regardless of age or gender, into a system of public service. Those unable to serve in the military contributed through labor, caring for herds, gathering fuel, cooking, repairing equipment, or even entertaining troops, their efforts recognized as vital contributions to the new nation. This system effectively dissolved the old distinctions between black and white bones, the privileged and the common, unifying the diverse Mongol people under a singular identity, the people of the Felt Walls. The impact of this organizational principle was profound. It instilled an unparalleled sense of cohesion and discipline. Warriors were not merely soldiers, they were brothers, bound by a pact of mutual support, forbidden to abandon one another in battle. This deep-seated loyalty, forged through shared hardship and a common purpose, became a hallmark of the Mongol army. Genghis Khan, in his wisdom, understood that true strength lay not in individual prowess, but in the collective will and unbreakable bond of his people. Furthermore, the decimal organization was a potent tool for social control and loyalty. By embedding the administrative structure within the military framework, Genghis Khan ensured that loyalty to the state was synonymous with loyalty to the army. The system also fostered a shared responsibility. A crime committed by one man could bring punishment to his entire unit, creating a powerful incentive for individuals to monitor and correct the behavior of their peers. This collective accountability extended to the highest levels, with the Great Khan himself bound by the Great Law, a revolutionary concept in an era when rulers often placed themselves above the law. The genius of the decimal organization lay in its adaptability. It was a flexible framework that could be applied to any situation, whether organizing a hunting party or administering a vast empire. It was a system built on merit and loyalty,
a stark contrast to the inherited privileges and constant feuding that plagued the fragmented tribes of the steppe. This innovative approach to social and military organization not only allowed Genghis Khan to forge a unified Mongol nation, but also provided the foundation for an empire that would soon reshape the known world. The decimal organization, a testament to Genghis Khan's strategic foresight, was the bedrock upon which his unparalleled conquests would be built.
The harsh, wind-swept steppes of 13th century Mongolia were a crucible, forging a warrior who would reshape the world. Temujin, the boy who would become Genghis Khan, was not born into privilege. Raised in the aftermath of his father's murder, his early life was marked by hardship, betrayal, and enslavement. Yet, from these brutal circumstances, a leader emerged, not by destiny, but by an unyielding will to power, a keen understanding of human nature, and an extraordinary capacity for strategic innovation. Temujin's ascent was a brutal testament to his ambition. His path was littered with the broken bodies of rivals, both kin and stranger. The assassination of his half-brother Begtar, an act born of simmering resentment and a struggle for dominance within his own family, was a stark early indicator of Temujin's ruthless pragmatism. He was not afraid to defy custom, break taboos, or shed the blood of even his closest relations if it served his ultimate goal. The subsequent flight and enslavement by the Toluid clan, followed by a daring escape, only hardened his resolve. These early traumas instilled in him a profound distrust of established hierarchies and a reliance on personal loyalty and merit over inherited status, a revolutionary concept in steppe society. His crucial alliances, forged in youth with men like Jamuka, proved double-edged. What began as a sworn brotherhood, a bond deemed stronger than kinship, would later fracture into a bitter, decades-long civil war that engulfed the nascent Mongol nation. Jamuka, representing the old aristocratic lineages, saw Temujin as an upstart, challenging the established order. Their rivalry culminated in devastating battles, and it was in these conflicts that Temujin began to refine his military genius. He learned to manipulate public opinion, employing psychological warfare alongside battlefield tactics. The infamous cruelty of Jamuka, boiling 70 captives alive, horrified many, and ironically fueled Temujin's support among those who feared such barbarity. Temujin's consolidation of power was not merely military, it was built on a foundation of carefully cultivated loyalty and a revolutionary restructuring of Mongol society. He broke the ancient power of kinship ties by appointing loyal companions, regardless of their lineage, to positions of authority. He organized his followers into decimal units, squads of 10, companies of 100, battalions of 1,000, and armies of 10,000, binding them together by oaths of mutual obligation and loyalty, a system that fostered unprecedented cohesion and discipline. This structure transcended tribal and ethnic divisions, forging a single, unified Mongol people, the people of the Felt Walls. This radical transformation was driven by a clear vision for his people. After decades of intertribal warfare, Temujin, now known as Genghis Khan, brought an end to the incessant raiding and feuding that had plagued the steppes for centuries. He did this not through mere conquest, but by establishing a comprehensive legal code, the Great Yasa. This was not a divinely revealed law, but one that emerged organically from the customs and traditions of the steppe, adapted and codified to regulate the most troublesome aspects of nomadic life. Kidnapping was outlawed. Theft of animals,
a constant source of conflict, became a capital offense. He established a system of property rights and enforced the return of lost goods. Importantly, Genghis Khan's law applied equally to the ruler as to the ruled, a radical concept in a world where monarchs often considered themselves above the law. Religious tolerance, a cornerstone of his legal code, further cemented his authority. While he personally worshipped the spirits of his homeland and the eternal blue sky, he recognized the diversity of beliefs within his growing empire. He exempted religious leaders and their property from taxation, fostering an environment where Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, and shamanism could coexist. This policy not only promoted peace within his realms, but also attracted scholars and artisans from across continents, enriching the nascent Mongol administration with diverse knowledge and skills. By 1206, Temujin had defeated every rival, unified the disparate Mongol tribes, and earned the title Genghis Khan, the oceanic ruler or universal ruler. His coronation, a grand spectacle on the steppes near his sacred mountain, Burkan Haldun, marked not just the birth of a new leader, but the foundation of a nation, the Yeke Mongol Ulus, the great Mongol nation. From this unified base, the meticulously organized Mongol army, armed with innovative tactics and a profound loyalty to their Khan, was poised to embark on a conquest that would redefine the boundaries of the known world, transforming warfare, trade, and culture across continents. The reign of terror on the steppe was over. The age of the Mongol World War was about to begin.
The proclamation of Genghis Khan, the Kurultai of 1206. In the year 1206, on the shores of the Blue Lake at the foot of the heart-shaped mountain, a momentous event transpired. It was here, at the headwaters of the Onon River, near the sacred mountain of Burkan Khaldun, that Temujin, a man who had risen from the deepest strata of steppe society, was proclaimed Genghis Khan. This was no mere coronation. It was the formal declaration of a new nation, the great Mongol nation, the Yeke Mongol Ulus, forged from the disparate and warring tribes of the Mongolian plateau. For decades, Temujin had navigated a brutal landscape of tribal warfare, personal betrayal, and constant struggle. From the abandonment of his family by his father's clan, to his own enslavement, to the profound rivalry with his childhood friend Jamuka, Temujin's life was a testament to resilience and a stark education in the harsh realities of steppe existence. He had learned to lead by example, to build loyalty not through kinship alone, but through merit and shared hardship. He had transformed his followers, once scattered outcasts, into a disciplined fighting force organized into decimal units, squads of 10, companies of 100, battalions of 1,000, and armies of 10,000. This new structure, revolutionary for its time, broke down old tribal loyalties and forged a unified people, the people of the felt walls, bound by a common purpose and unwavering loyalty to their leader. The proclamation at the Kurultai, a grand council of representatives from every corner of his burgeoning territory, was the culmination of this arduous journey. Tens of thousands of animals grazed nearby, providing the sustenance for the thousands of people gathered. The air vibrated with the sounds of shamans pounding drums and chanting to the spirits of nature, of musicians playing, and of the unique Mongolian throat singing that resonated with the very essence of the land. Young warriors competed in the traditional games of wrestling, horse racing, and archery, the nadam, demonstrating the prowess that had brought them to this point. At the center of it all stood the Sulde,
the spirit banner of Genghis Khan, made from the hair of his finest stallions, a symbol of his identity and his perpetual guardian. It was this banner, imbued with the power of the wind, the sky, and the sun, that had guided him across the steppe, leading him to victory against rivals like Jamuka, the Merkid, the Taichud, the Tartars, and the Naiman. It was a testament to his vision of a unified people, a single nation under one law. The title Genghis Khan itself derived from the Mongol word chin, meaning strong, firm, unshakable, and fearless, resonated with the very essence of his being and his mission. Unlike previous rulers who often claimed divine right or inherited power, Genghis Khan had earned his position through sheer force of personality, strategic brilliance, and an unwavering will. He had united a fragmented people, creating a new world order based on individual merit and loyalty, not birthright. He granted religious freedom within his realms, demanding only absolute loyalty in return. He established an international postal system, promoted trade by creating the largest free trade zone in history, and laid the groundwork for a legal code that applied equally to all, from the lowest herder to the Khan himself. In that moment, on the vast open steppe, on the ancestral lands sacred to his people, Genghis Khan, then in his mid-40s, stood not just as a tribal leader, but as the architect of a new world. He had forged a nation from the crucible of conflict, and with this proclamation, he set in motion the forces that would reshape the Eurasian continent and irrevocably alter the course of human history. The reign of terror on the steppe had given way to the dawn of an empire built on the singular vision of one man who had dared to dream beyond the confines of his world.
In 1210, a significant moment unfolded on the steppes, marking not merely a diplomatic encounter, but a profound declaration of independence and defiance. The Jurchen rulers, based in their sophisticated capital of Zhongdu, the precursor to modern Beijing, had long asserted a claim of sovereignty over the nomadic tribes inhabiting the vast territories to their south. Founded nearly a century earlier, the Jurchen dynasty, originating from the forests of Manchuria, viewed themselves as the overlords of all steppe peoples. Having previously demanded and received fealty from figures like Ong Khan, the Jurchen had now turned their attention to the ascendant Genghis Khan. The Jurchen's influence over the steppes was not primarily derived from military might, but from their tight control over the flow of essential manufactured goods from the cities and workshops of China. For a steppe Khan, maintaining a steady supply of these coveted items was crucial to solidifying his power and ensuring the loyalty of his followers. Genghis Khan's unprecedented success in uniting the disparate Mongol tribes had inadvertently disrupted this established order. By forging a single cohesive Mongol nation, he had disrupted the traditional cycle of looting that had previously provided access to these goods. Now he faced a critical choice: either submit to the Jurchen and accept the status of a vassal warrior receiving tribute, or confront them directly and seize the goods he and his people needed. Genghis Khan harbored no trust for the Jurchen. The Mongols shared closer ethnic and linguistic ties with the Khitan, a people whom the Jurchen had conquered and subjugated. Many Khitan, seeking refuge from Jurchen rule, had already fled to Genghis Khan's protection. In 1208, 4 high-ranking Jurchen officials had defected to the Mongols, urging them to attack the Jurchen. Genghis Khan, however, had remained cautious, wary of potential traps or schemes. Then in 1210,
an unexpected shift occurred. The Golden Khan of the Jurchen died, and his young son ascended to the throne. The Jurchen court seized this moment as an opportunity to assess the burgeoning power of Genghis Khan. They dispatched an envoy to his encampment, not merely to announce the change in leadership, but to demand a profound demonstration of submission from Genghis Khan and his newly forged nation. The expected ritual of submission, as described in later ceremonies, involved kneeling, declaring oneself a Mongol slave, and beating one's head upon the ground in grateful acknowledgement of imperial bounty. Genghis Khan, a man approaching 50, understood the significance of such a gesture. He had bowed before the eternal blue sky, but he would bow to no man. He was not a Mongol slave, he was the great Khan. The historical accounts, though varied in detail, paint a vivid picture of his response. Genghis Khan is reported to have turned towards the south, spitting on the ground, a profound act of contempt in steppe culture. He then unleashed a torrent of insults directed at the Golden Khan. Without another word to the envoy, he mounted his horse and rode north, leaving the envoy choking in the dust of his departure. This act of spitting on the envoy and the verbal repudiation of the Jurchen demand was more than a personal insult. It was a potent and unequivocal declaration of war. Genghis Khan's existing need for trade goods provided a clear motive for conflict, and the Jurchen demand for submission offered him the perfect pretext. The stage was set for a confrontation that would irrevocably alter the trajectory of history, igniting a conflagration that would eventually engulf the world. The year was 1211, the year of the sheep, and Genghis Khan summoned a Kurultai, a council of his people, to formalize their decision. The message was clear: they would march south, not as subjects, but as conquerors, towards the resplendent cities of the Jurchen Empire.
The Jurchen campaign, launched in 1211, was a pivotal moment that showcased Genghis Khan's evolving military genius and his capacity to integrate diverse talents. It was not merely a battle for territory, but a carefully orchestrated demonstration of novel warfare, psychological manipulation, and the pragmatic integration of conquered people's skills. Facing the Jurchen Jin dynasty, a formidable power that had long dominated the northern Chinese steppe and exacted tribute from nomadic tribes, Genghis Khan initiated a conflict that would redefine Mongol military strategy. The Jurchen, rulers of a sophisticated state with advanced siege technology and a larger, though less mobile, army, initially underestimated the Mongols. Their confidence, perhaps born from centuries of controlling the steppe, was evident in their dismissive remarks, famously comparing their empire to the sea and the Mongol forces to a mere handful of sand. This underestimation, however, played directly into Genghis Khan's hands. He understood that true victory often began not on the battlefield, but in the minds of his enemies, by fostering fear and exploiting divisions. Genghis Khan's approach to this campaign was characterized by meticulous preparation and an almost unparalleled understanding of logistical and psychological warfare. Before the main army advanced, specialized squads scouted the terrain, meticulously identifying water sources, grass conditions, and the inhabitants of the region. They sought to understand every resource, every potential ally or enemy, and, crucially, to secure viable escape routes should the need arise. This detailed reconnaissance allowed the Mongols to move with an unprecedented level of coordination and foresight, a stark contrast to the more rigid, column-based movements of traditional armies. The Mongol army itself was a marvel of adaptation and organization, composed primarily of cavalry. Numbering around 65,000 horsemen, they confronted an enemy force that not only matched their numbers in cavalry, but also possessed a significant advantage in infantry.
Yet the Jurchen's infantry was less mobile, and their reliance on cumbersome supply trains hampered their ability to respond to the swift maneuvers of the Mongol horsemen. The Mongols, in contrast, traveled light, carrying only what was essential for survival and combat. Their diet of meat, milk, and dairy products, combined with their hardy upbringing, made them physically superior to the grain-fed soldiers of sedentary civilizations, who often suffered from malnutrition and disease. Each warrior was equipped for independent survival, carrying personal supplies for fire-making, water, food, weapon maintenance, and rudimentary repairs. Genghis Khan's military organization was built on the decimal system, with units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 men, each led by a commander. This structure, deeply ingrained in Mongol society, provided a framework for both battlefield tactics and logistical support. The army moved not in a single mass, but in a vast, spread-out formation, with units positioned to provide mutual support, scouting, and protection for the valuable reserve of horses that accompanied them. This decentralized yet coordinated approach allowed for flexibility and resilience, enabling them to cover immense distances and adapt to varied terrains. Crucially, the Mongols recognized the limitations of their own cultural and technological base. While their horsemanship and archery were unparalleled, they lacked the sophisticated siege technology that the Jurchen possessed. Genghis Khan, however, was a master of adaptation. He did not shy away from integrating the skills of conquered peoples into his own army. Captured Chinese engineers, skilled in the construction of catapults, trebuchets, and mangonels, were pressed into Mongol service. These machines, capable of hurling stones, fire, and even unknown explosive substances, became instruments of terror and destruction, allowing the Mongols to overcome heavily fortified cities that had previously been impervious to nomadic armies. Similarly, the Jurchen's use of the fire lance, an early form of flamethrower, was eagerly adopted and refined by the Mongols, who saw its potential not just for igniting fires, but for creating confusion and disorientation. The Jurchen campaign also highlighted the Mongols' sophisticated use of propaganda and psychological warfare. Genghis Khan understood the importance of fostering internal dissent among his enemies. He skillfully exploited the existing tensions between the Jurchen rulers and their Khitan subjects. By presenting the Mongol invasion as a liberation force aimed at restoring the Khitan monarchy, he garnered significant support from Khitan defectors, who provided invaluable intelligence about the land and its people. The formal restoration of the Khitan monarchy as a vassal state within the Mongol Empire was a strategic masterstroke, further dividing the Jurchen and weakening their resolve. The campaign was also a testament to Genghis Khan's ability to mobilize talent from diverse backgrounds. He actively sought out and integrated individuals with specialized skills, particularly from conquered sedentary populations. Khitan scholars like Yelu Chuchai, who possessed knowledge of Chinese culture, astrology, and administration, became indispensable advisors, helping to shape the Mongol approach to governing conquered territories. The Mongols understood that true conquest extended beyond the battlefield. It involved the effective administration and integration of diverse populations and their knowledge. This pragmatic approach to talent acquisition, valuing skill and loyalty above lineage or origin, was a hallmark of Genghis Khan's genius and a key factor in the long-term success of the Mongol Empire. Through the Jurchen campaign and its subsequent evolution, Genghis Khan laid the groundwork for a military and administrative system that would fundamentally alter the course of world history.
In the spring of 1220, Genghis Khan, at the age of nearly 60, broke with his usual practice of observing battles from a distance. He led his cavalry personally into the conquered city of Bukhara, a jewel in the crown of the Sultan of Quaditsin,
and a city revered throughout the Muslim world as Noble Bukhara, the ornament and delight to all Islam. This was no mere act of conquest. It was a strategic maneuver, the culmination of one of the most audacious surprise attacks in military history. While one part of his army marched directly from Mongolia, Genghis Khan secretly guided another division of warriors across the formidable Kizilkum Desert, a 2,000-mile journey through treacherous terrain that even trade caravans avoided by hundreds of miles. He had befriended the nomads of the region, who guided his army through hidden tracks across the stone and sand. Bukhara, situated in a fertile oasis astride a tributary of the Amu Darya, was ruled by Turkic tribesmen within the nascent empire of Khwarezm. The Sultan Muhammad II, in a fatal error, had provoked Genghis Khan's wrath by looting a Mongol trade caravan and disfiguring the faces of Mongol ambassadors sent to negotiate peaceful commerce. Upon hearing of this insult, the aged but resolute Genghis Khan summoned his army once more. The Mongol army traveled lightly, without a cumbersome supply train. By crossing the desert in the coldest months, they minimized their need for water. Dew provided sustenance for their horses, and game was plentiful for their own needs. Instead of heavy siege engines, they brought an engineer corps capable of constructing what was needed on the spot from local materials. Arriving at the first trees after the desert, they felled them to create ladders and siege engines for their assault. Genghis Khan employed a calculated strategy of psychological warfare. Upon emerging from the desert, he did not immediately attack Bukhara. He knew that reinforcements were impossible from the border cities under attack by his main army, so he played on the element of surprise, torturing the populace with fear and hope. His objective was simple: to force surrender before battle. He captured smaller towns first, deliberately creating a wave of refugees who streamed into Bukhara, amplifying the terror within its walls. As the Persian chronicler Atta Malik Juvaini described, when the countryside was choked with horsemen and the air black as night with the dust of cavalry, fright and panic overcame them. Genghis Khan's tactic of fear was amplified by offering generous terms of surrender to outlying communities who accepted Mongol rule, receiving great leniency. Those who refused, however, faced exceptionally harsh treatment, with captives often herded before the Mongol army to be used as cannon fodder in the next assault. This strategy panicked the Turkic defenders of Bukhara. Leaving only a small garrison of 500 soldiers to man the citadel, the main army of 20,000 fled, convinced they could outrun the approaching Mongols. This flight, however, played directly into Genghis Khan's trap. Mongol warriors already positioned to intercept the fleeing soldiers cut them down with ease. The civilian population of Bukhara surrendered, opening the city gates. However, a small contingent of defiant soldiers remained in their citadel, hoping its massive walls would provide indefinite defense. Genghis Khan, seeking to assess the situation, made his unprecedented decision to enter the city. Upon reaching the center of Bukhara, one of his first acts was to summon citizens to provide fodder for his horses. This was a gesture of submission. Receiving fodder signaled his acceptance of them as vassals, subject to his command and entitled to his protection. The Persian chronicler Minhaj al-Siraj Jujiani, though not favorably disposed to the Mongols, described Genghis Khan as a man of tall stature, of vigorous build, robust in body, the hair on his face scanty and turned white, with cat's eyes, possessed of dedicated energy, discernment, genius, and understanding, awe-striking, a butcher, just, resolute, an overthrower of enemies, intrepid, sanguinary, and cruel. He also noted Genghis Khan's uncanny ability to destroy cities and conquer armies many times the size of his own,
declaring him adept at magic and deception, and some of the devils were his friends. Upon reaching the central mosque, Genghis Khan, a devout worshipper of the eternal blue sky, dismounted to enter the grand structure. He ordered the scholars and clerics, whom he generally protected and placed under his command, to feed his horses. Then he summoned the city's 280 wealthiest men to the mosque. Addressing them from the pulpit through interpreters, he sternly lectured them on the sins of their sultan and themselves, stating, "If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." He then assigned each wealthy man to a Mongol warrior, who collected their treasures, not only the visible wealth, but also all hidden or buried riches. Having initiated the systematic plunder, Genghis Khan turned his attention to the citadel's defiant Turkic warriors. While Central Asian cities like Bukhara and Samarkand had faced barbarian armies before, the Mongols' mastery of siege warfare, utilizing catapults, trebuchets, mangonels, portable towers, and sapping miners, presented a new and terrifying level of destruction. He even used prisoners, sometimes comrades of the besieged, as human shields to fill the moats and form ramparts for his machines. Genghis Khan's army combined the ferocity of the steppe warrior with the sophisticated technology of Chinese civilization. His cavalry attacked enemy infantry on the ground, while his bombardment technology, including early forms of mortars and cannons, penetrated fortress walls and terrorized defenders. In the words of Juvaini, the Sultan's warriors were drowned in the sea of annihilation. Genghis Khan understood warfare as a total commitment of one people against another, where victory meant complete, undeniable triumph. Terror and surprise were his primary weapons. Resistance met death. Loyalty met security. His successful campaign against Bukhara led to the surrender of Samarkand, the next city on his march. Genghis Khan himself led the main army across Afghanistan to the Indus River, while another detachment circled the Caspian Sea and marched into Russia. For 700 years, from 1220 until 1920, his descendants ruled Bukhara. The conquest of Khwarezm and the subsequent destruction of its ancient civilization served as a brutal testament to Genghis Khan's strategic genius. He had learned his tactics over decades of warfare, meticulously adapting and combining new ideas into a constantly evolving military machine. His approach was pragmatic, driven by a focused will and a relentless pursuit of total victory, transforming the very nature of warfare and leaving an indelible mark on the trajectory of human history.
The Conquest of Europe, Subutai and Jebe's Western Expedition. After the devastating campaigns against the Khwarezmian Empire, Genghis Khan's gaze turned westward, not for conquest, but for reconnaissance. In 1221, as his main forces returned to Mongolia, he dispatched two of his most trusted and skilled generals, Subutai and Jebe, on a mission of unparalleled audacity. A vast, encircling reconnaissance of the lands lying beyond the Caspian Sea. This was not an invasion in the traditional sense, but a daring probe into the unknown, a strategic gamble to map out future possibilities and assess potential enemies. Their mandate was clear: to ride as far as they could, learn as much as possible, and return with intelligence. Subutai, the veteran of countless campaigns, and Jebe, renowned for his swiftness and daring, led a formidable force of approximately 20,000 cavalry. Their journey was epic in scope, a whirlwind tour of diverse civilizations. They first traversed the formidable Caucasus Mountains, a natural barrier that had stymied many armies before them.
Subutai and Jebe, however, demonstrated a mastery of terrain and logistics, skillfully navigating the treacherous passes. Their expedition then descended upon the plains of Eastern Europe, a region largely unknown to the Mongols. They encountered the Kipchak Turks, a nomadic people whose pastoral lifestyle was remarkably similar to that of the Mongols themselves. Leveraging these shared traditions and linguistic connections, the Mongols were able to forge alliances with some Kipchak tribes, turning potential enemies into valuable reconnaissance assets and gathering crucial intelligence about the lands to their north and west. The true target of Subutai and Jebe's reconnaissance lay beyond the Kipchak steppes, the various principalities and city-states of what would later become Russia. These fragmented lands, dominated by rival princes and lacking a unified command, presented a stark contrast to the disciplined military machine the Mongols had encountered in Asia. The Mongols, ever the astute strategists, understood that division was their greatest ally. As they advanced, they meticulously gathered information, identifying cities, assessing political divisions, and probing the rivalries among the various Russian princes. Their strategy was to appear as a probing force, not a full-scale invasion. They engaged in skirmishes, feigned retreats, and diplomatic overtures, all designed to gauge the enemy's response and identify weaknesses. In a display of classic Mongol military cunning, Subutai and Jebe initiated a feigned retreat after initial engagements. This tactic lured the united Russian forces, numbering significantly more than the Mongol contingent, into a prolonged pursuit. The Russian princes, eager for glory and plunder and fearing the Mongols might escape, broke their own disciplined ranks and chased the retreating force. This fragmentation, combined with the exhaustion of the Russian soldiers and their poorly equipped peasant infantry, proved fatal. The Mongols, under the masterful command of Subutai and Jebe, meticulously led the pursuing Russian forces to a predetermined location on the Kalka River. Here, the Mongols, expertly utilizing their mounted archers and disciplined formations, unleashed a devastating assault. The Russians, caught off guard by the Mongols' silent attack and relentless volleys of arrows, quickly descended into chaos. Their attempts to retreat only exacerbated the slaughter, as the fragmented Russian armies were systematically destroyed. The scale of the Mongol victory was absolute. The Russian chronicles paint a grim picture of the aftermath, stating that only every 10th returned to his home. This decisive defeat not only annihilated a major European army, but also sent shockwaves through the continent, a chilling harbinger of what was to come. Yet Subutai and Jebe's primary objective was not conquest, but reconnaissance. Having thoroughly mapped the region and assessed its military capabilities, they led their victorious but depleted force back towards Mongolia, leaving behind a legend and a profound sense of dread. Though the immediate objective was intelligence gathering, the Western expedition of Subutai and Jebe had profound and lasting consequences. It served as a crucial precursor to the full-scale Mongol invasions of Europe that would follow in the coming decades, providing invaluable first-hand knowledge that would later guide the campaigns of Batu Khan and Subutai himself. More than just a military probe, this Western journey was a testament to the Mongols' unparalleled strategic vision, their mastery of reconnaissance, and their relentless pursuit of knowledge that would ultimately reshape the world. They had tasted the vulnerability of Europe, and the seeds of its future conquest had been sown.
The vast Mongol armies, honed by decades of warfare and driven by an insatiable need for resources, turned their formidable attention westward. following the trails blazed by Genghis Khan's initial reconnaissance missions, led by his brilliant generals Jebe and Subodai. The Mongol World War reached the fragmented principalities of Kievan Rus. This region, a collection of loosely allied Slavic states, would soon face a devastating onslaught that would forever alter its political landscape and its place in history. The initial Mongol probes into Eastern Europe, beginning in 1223 with the Battle of the Kalka River, served as a brutal introduction to the terrifying efficacy of Mongol warfare. Subodai and Jebe, leading a force of approximately 50,000, encountered a coalition of Russian princes who, despite their numerical superiority, were utterly unprepared for the disciplined and devastating tactics of the Mongol cavalry. The feigned retreat, the relentless barrage of arrows, the relentless pursuit, and the calculated exploitation of enemy disunity proved catastrophic for the Russian forces. Prince Mstislav of Kiev and his sons-in-law, along with many other princes, met their demise in a manner that foreshadowed the grim efficiency of Mongol conquest. The Battle of the Kalka River was not merely a military defeat, it was an annihilation, leaving what was described as only every 10th man to return home. Despite this crushing victory, the Mongols under Jebe and Subodai did not linger to occupy the territory. Their mission was reconnaissance, and having thoroughly assessed the military capabilities of the disparate Russian principalities, they retreated back to the Mongol heartlands. This withdrawal, however, was not an act of mercy or indifference. It was a strategic pause. The Mongols had gleaned invaluable intelligence about the fragmented nature of Rus and the internal rivalries that weakened it. They understood that further conquest would be made easier by this disunity, a lesson ingrained from their own unification of the Mongol tribes. The true invasion of Rus occurred in 1237 under the command of Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, and guided by the seasoned strategic genius of Subodai. This was no mere scouting mission, it was a full-scale subjugation. The Mongol army, estimated at around 50,000 Mongol warriors, supported by approximately 100,000 allies, moved with a terrifying purpose. Their objective was not simply to defeat armies, but to dismantle entire societies. The Mongol strategy was multi-pronged, a hallmark of their military brilliance. As they advanced, small scouting units probed defenses, identified pasture lands for their vast herds of horses, and gathered intelligence on local populations and political divisions. This meticulous preparation allowed them to exploit the critical weakness of Rus, its disunity. Rather than facing a unified front, Batu Khan's forces encountered a patchwork of individual principalities, each often more concerned with its own survival and rivalries than with a collective defense. The initial target, the city of Ryazan, fell victim to a devastating siege. The Mongols, using their conscripted laborers, constructed a wall that completely encircled the city, sealing off any possibility of escape or reinforcement. Behind this stockade, they employed their terrifying array of siege engines, hurling rocks, flaming naphtha, and unknown substances that created an environment of smoke, fire, and fear. The psychological impact was as potent as the physical destruction. The ensuing bombardment softened the city's defenses, and when the Mongols finally breached the walls, the city was systematically looted and burned. The survivors, including aristocrats, were ruthlessly executed. The subsequent campaigns followed a similar, brutal pattern. Cities that surrendered were spared the initial fury of destruction, but were forced to submit to Mongol overlordship, providing tribute, soldiers, and laborers. Those that resisted faced utter annihilation. Cities like Vladimir, Suzdal, and Kiev
once centers of culture and power, were systematically razed. The Chronicle of Novgorod, lamenting the devastation, noted that no eye remained open to cry for the dead after the Mongols passed. The Russian principalities, once a proud and significant entity, were systematically dismantled, their armies crushed, their cities destroyed, and their populations subjected to a brutal and alien rule. The Mongol conquest of Kievan Rus was not simply about military victory, it was about societal transformation. The Mongols' decimal organization, their insistence on loyalty over kinship, and their efficient use of conquered populations as support units fundamentally altered the existing social and political structures. The destruction of the existing knighthood and aristocracy, coupled with the systematic looting and depopulation of resistance centers, created a power vacuum filled by the ironclad discipline of the Mongol Khans. The fragmented principalities of Kievan Rus were not merely conquered, they were annihilated as independent entities, paving the way for the eventual rise of a new power structure under Mongol suzerainty, which would ultimately coalesce into the Muscovite Tsardom. The Russian campaigns represented a terrifying and decisive phase of the Mongol World War, leaving an indelible mark on the history of Eastern Europe.
The Hungarian and Polish invasions, the Mongol Terror, and its impact. In the crucible of the 13th century, the Mongol World War, ignited by Genghis Khan, reshaped continents and redefined warfare itself. While the initial shockwaves of Mongol conquest have been felt across Asia and into the Middle East, the formidable military machine forged by the Great Khan and his sons continued its inexorable march, eventually turning its attention westward towards the fragmented kingdoms of Europe. This dramatic expansion, often characterized by Western sources as the Mongol Terror, was not merely a series of brutal invasions. It was a complex interaction of cultures, technologies, and political ambitions that would irrevocably alter the trajectory of European civilization. Following the devastating campaigns in Khwarezm and Persia, and having already probed the fringes of Eastern Europe, the Mongol army, under the brilliant general Subodhi, turned its sights towards the vast and largely unknown lands of the West. The initial European encounter came in 1223 with Subodhi's reconnaissance mission into the lands of the Kipchak Turks and the various Russian principalities. Here, the Mongols encountered a fragmented landscape of warring states, their armies often poorly equipped and their leadership divided by rivalries. The subsequent execution of a Mongol envoy by the Russian princes, a grave diplomatic blunder in the eyes of the Mongols, served as a stark warning. The devastating victory at the Kaka River, where a united Russian army, significantly outnumbering the Mongol forces, was annihilated, sent a chilling message across Eastern Europe. Despite the overwhelming tactical success, the initial Mongol foray into Europe yielded little material gain compared to the riches of Asia. The punitive expedition, having fulfilled its purpose of reconnaissance and retribution, withdrew, leaving the Europeans to lapse back into their own internal conflicts, their memory of the invaders fading into a mystifying, almost supernatural encounter. The true large-scale invasion of Europe, however, began in 1236 under the leadership of Batu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, and guided by the seasoned general Subodhi. This multi-pronged offensive was a testament to the evolved Mongol military machine. The army, now numbering over 150,000 men, comprised not only Mongols, but also a diverse array of allied Turkic, Chinese, and even European engineers and doctors. The Mongol strategy of dividing their forces and attacking on multiple fronts simultaneously, coupled with the psychological warfare of terrorizing the populace, proved devastatingly effective. Cities like Ryazan and Kiev were systematically besieged and destroyed, their defenses overcome by a combination of superior battlefield tactics, advanced siege weaponry derived from Chinese and Muslim sources,
and a chillingly efficient exploitation of the enemy's internal divisions and psychological weaknesses. The sheer terror instilled by the Mongol approach, as described by terrified chroniclers, was amplified by their speed, their disciplined, coordinated movements, and their apparent immunity to the conventional tactics of European warfare. The Mongol army, with its famed light cavalry, feigned retreats, and devastating arrow volleys, shattered the rigid formations of the European knights. Their tactical innovations, such as the moving bush and chisel formations, allowed them to concentrate overwhelming force at specific points in the enemy's lines, achieving a level of battlefield dominance rarely seen. The invasions of Hungary and Poland in 1241 marked the apex of Mongol military penetration into Europe. Subodhi, despite his advanced age and physical limitations, orchestrated a masterful campaign. The devastating defeat of the Polish and German knights at Liegnitz showcased the Mongol ability to exploit European overconfidence and tactical inflexibility. Simultaneously, in Hungary, the Mongol army engaged and annihilated the Hungarian forces led by King Bela IV at the Battle of Mohi. This campaign further demonstrated the Mongols' mastery of psychological warfare, using fire and smoke to disorient their enemies, and their unique ability to adapt captured technologies, such as gunpowder weapons, for devastating effect. The Mongols' capacity to operate with unprecedented speed and coordination across vast distances, fueled by their vast reserves of horses and their ability to live off the land, left the Europeans bewildered and terrified. The aftermath of these campaigns was dire. Cities were razed, populations decimated, and the very fabric of European feudal society was shaken. The destruction of the European knighthood at Liegnitz and Mohi, and combined with the pervasive fear of the Mongol terror, ushered in a period of profound change, effectively ending the era of the medieval knight and foreshadowing the military transformations of the coming centuries. While the Mongol invasions brought destruction, they also inadvertently opened up new trade routes and fostered unprecedented cultural contact between the East and the West. The very same roads and relay stations that had facilitated the movement of Mongol armies now carried merchants, missionaries, and diplomats, fostering a period known as the Pax Mongolica. This unprecedented intercontinental system of communication, commerce, and technology transfer, initiated by the Mongol conquests, would ultimately sow the seeds of the European Renaissance. The flow of goods, ideas, and technologies, from paper and gunpowder to printing and the compass, transformed European society, paving the way for its own ascendancy in the centuries that followed. While the Mongol invasions brought destruction, they also inadvertently laid the foundations for a more interconnected world, a legacy that continues to shape our modern era.
The Mongol world system: trade, technology, and cultural exchange. The Mongol Empire, forged in the crucible of the steppe, transcended mere military conquest to become a dynamic engine of global integration. Beyond the thunder of hooves and the terror of the battlefield, the Mongols orchestrated a revolution in trade, technology, and cultural exchange, fundamentally reshaping the Eurasian world. Their vast, contiguous empire, stretching from the Pacific to the Mediterranean, created an unprecedented environment for the movement of goods, ideas, and people, laying the groundwork for a truly global awakening. At the heart of this interconnectedness was the Pax Mongolica, a period of relative peace and stability enforced across the immense empire. This peace, however, was not a passive state. It was actively maintained by the Mongols' sophisticated logistical and administrative innovations. They established the Ortu, a vast network of postal relay stations, essentially creating the world's first true international postal system. These stations, spaced every 20 to 30 miles across the empire, provided fresh horses, guides, and provisions, making long-distance travel feasible and relatively safe for merchants, diplomats, and scholars. The Mongol paisa, a tablet of gold, silver, or wood, served as a passport and credit card, granting its holder safe passage
accommodation, and exemption from local taxes throughout the empire. This infrastructure was not born of an abstract love for commerce, but from the deeply ingrained Mongol system of kubi, or shares, where every member of the golden family was entitled to a portion of the empire's wealth. This system, while benefiting the ruling elite, necessitated and fueled the massive movement of goods and people across the vast distances. The Mongols were not innovators of technology in the traditional sense. They were avid collectors and disseminators. Lacking the advanced skills in metallurgy, pottery, or textiles that flourished in the conquered civilizations, they actively sought out and transported artisans from across their domains. German miners were brought to China, Chinese doctors to Persia, and Muslim engineers to Mongolia. This deliberate transfer of knowledge and technology was a cornerstone of Mongol policy. They recognized that to administer their vast empire, they needed the skills of the conquered peoples. From the meticulously crafted porcelain of China to the intricate metalwork of Persia and the advanced siege weaponry of the Jurchen, these technologies flowed across the empire, transforming local industries and fostering new innovations. The transfer of agricultural knowledge was equally profound. The Mongols actively promoted the cultivation of crops best suited to different climates, encouraging the exchange of varieties like rice and tea from China to the Middle East, and introducing lemons and carrots from Persia to China. They facilitated the spread of improved farming techniques and tools, such as the triangular plow introduced into China from Southeast Asia, and new irrigation systems were developed in Persia to revitalize eroded lands. This agricultural exchange not only improved food production, but also supported the burgeoning populations within the empire and fueled the constant movement of armies and caravans. Perhaps the most transformative aspect of the Mongol impact was the unprecedented cross-cultural fertilization it enabled. The vast network of trade routes, patrolled and maintained by Mongol forces, became conduits for the exchange of ideas, religions, and cultural practices. While the Mongols themselves practiced a form of shamanism and later displayed a remarkable tolerance for a multitude of faiths, their empire became a melting pot where Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Taoism coexisted and interacted. They built churches in China, Buddhist temples in Persia, and Muslim schools in Russia, demonstrating a pragmatic approach to governance that prioritized unity and stability over religious imposition. This religious tolerance, a stark contrast to often intolerant practices in contemporary Europe, fostered a unique environment for intellectual and artistic development. The Mongols' appreciation for diverse skills led to the establishment of institutions that fostered learning and innovation. Kublai Khan, in particular, commissioned the creation of a unified alphabet for all languages, though its adoption was limited. He established a Department of Monetary Affairs to standardize currency and manage paper money, a concept inherited from China. The development of more accurate calendars and the compilation of sophisticated maps synthesized knowledge from Chinese, Arab, and Greek traditions. The printing of books, already known in China, was massively expanded under Mongol patronage, leading to a surge in literacy and the dissemination of knowledge on an unprecedented scale. This intermingling of cultures profoundly impacted Europe. The transmission of technologies such as gunpowder, the compass, and crucially the printing press, originating in the East, had a catalytic effect on the European Renaissance. The artistic innovations, evident in the adoption of Mongol dress, motifs, and even script in European paintings, reflected a newfound awareness of the wider world. The very notion of a global system began to take shape,
driven by the Mongol capacity to move people, goods, and information across immense distances, breaking down the isolation that had characterized earlier regional civilizations. The Mongol Empire, in its complex and often brutal expansion, inadvertently sowed the seeds of a world system that valued interconnectedness, exchange, and the pragmatic application of knowledge, ideas that would continue to shape the modern world long after the empire itself had fragmented.
The rule of the queens, Torjin, Fatima, and the shifting power dynamics. Following the death of Genghis Khan and later his son Ogode, a period of transition arose, one that would see an unexpected shift in power dynamics within the nascent Mongol Empire. The vastness of the empire, stretching across continents, had outgrown the capacity of a single mobile tent court. While the men engaged in campaigns across continents, the task of administering this colossal entity largely fell to the women of the Golden Family. This era, stretching from the death of Ogode in 1241 to the accession of Mongol Khan in 1251, became known as the rule of the queens. At the forefront of this period was Torjin, the most capable wife of Ogode Khan. Though not the senior wife, her political acumen allowed her to assume the regency when Ogode, increasingly incapacitated by drink, began to cede administrative power. Torjin, a woman from a conquered steppe tribe, demonstrated remarkable political skill. She understood the need to consolidate power, and upon Ogode's death, immediately set about orchestrating the election of her son Guyuk as the next great Khan. This was a bold move, as Ogode had nominated a grandson, bypassing Torjin's own divisive son. To achieve her goal, Torjin undertook meticulous political maneuvering. She dismissed Ogode's ministers, replacing them with her own loyalists. Among these was Fatima, a Tajik or Persian woman captured during the Khwarizm campaign. Fatima, described as a confidant and repository of secrets, wielded significant influence, issuing commands and prohibitions while other ministers were sidelined. This period marked a departure from Genghis Khan's established practices, where power was vested in his trusted friends and loyal followers, not primarily within his own family. Torjin's efforts to secure Guyuk's election faced challenges. She struggled to gather a quorum of the Golden Family, indicating that Guyuk's candidacy was not universally supported. Despite these obstacles, Torjin's regency brought a crucial decade of peace to the empire, allowing for consolidation of holdings and recovery from the initial decades of the Mongol World War. This peace, however, was not without its internal power struggles. The queens, each vying to place their own sons on the throne, engaged in fierce competition, with the ultimate fate of losing women being particularly brutal. Guyuk's accession in 1246, following Torjin's 10-year regency, proved short-lived and tumultuous. His reign was marked by a campaign of revenge and a consolidation of power that included attacking his mother's trusted advisor, Fatima. The vague records surrounding Fatima's fate and the death of Torjin herself highlight the shifting allegiances and inherent dangers within the court. Guyuk's subsequent and arguably vindictive actions against his uncle Temujin Ochikin and his attempts to assert control over the estates of his cousins further destabilized the empire. Guyuk's own reign was cut short after only 18 months, dying under mysterious circumstances. This sudden demise left the imperial succession open once more, and the stage was set for the return of another formidable woman, Sorkok Tani, the widow of Toluid, Genghis Khan's youngest son.
Sorkoktani, possessing a lifetime of preparation and strategic patience, seized the opportunity to elevate her sons. Through a series of astute political maneuvers, including a carefully orchestrated election in the sacred Mongol homeland of Burkhan Haldun, she secured the position of Great Khan for her eldest son, Monkey. Sorkoktani's victory marked the end of the decade of rule by the queens. While they competed fiercely amongst themselves, their era had been instrumental in bringing outside talent into the empire's inner circle, supporting religion and education, and fostering the exchange of ideas. These foundational elements, established during the queen's rule, would ultimately have a profound impact on the world, shaping the future trajectory of the Mongol Empire and the civilizations it touched. The period of the queens, though fraught with internal conflict and brutal succession struggles, demonstrated the enduring power and political acumen of Mongol women, who managed the vast empire while the men were engaged in conquest, laying the groundwork for the subsequent phases of Mongol expansion and influence.
The rise of the Toluid line, Möngke Khan's reign, and the expansion of the empire. The death of Genghis Khan in 1227 marked not an end, but a crucial transition. His empire, forged through relentless warfare and unparalleled military organization, was now poised for an era of unprecedented expansion and consolidation under his descendants. While the initial decades after his passing saw a series of localized campaigns and the internal struggles for succession, it was under Möngke Khan, a grandson of Genghis, that the empire truly embarked on its most ambitious phase, often termed the Mongol World War, a period of conquest and global impact that spanned from 1211 to 1261. Möngke Khan's reign, though relatively brief, represented a pivotal moment, embodying the Toluid line's ascendancy and significantly shaping the trajectory of the vast Mongol dominion. Born into the lineage of Toluid, Genghis Khan's youngest son, Möngke inherited a legacy of military prowess and shrewd political acumen, traits honed by his mother, the formidable Sorkoktani. Sorkoktani, a Christian Karaid woman, played a critical role in grooming her sons for leadership, navigating the treacherous currents of succession that plagued the early empire. Her influence was instrumental in positioning Möngke, a man known for his sober disposition and dedication to the laws of his grandfather, to ascend to the position of Great Khan in 1251. Unlike his uncles, Ögödei and Guyuk, who succumbed to excess and infighting, Möngke embodied a return to the pragmatic, disciplined ethos of Genghis Khan. He was a man who eschewed personal luxury, preferring the continuation of his grandfather's simpler lifestyle and adherence to the Great Law. Möngke Khan's vision was to solidify and expand the empire not through arbitrary destruction, but through a carefully orchestrated application of Mongol power and an astute understanding of global politics. He recognized the need to bring order to the vast, disparate territories inherited from Genghis Khan, and to do so, he focused on re-establishing efficient administration and communication. The system of relay stations, or ortu, established by his grandfather, was not only maintained but expanded, creating an unprecedented network for swift and reliable communication across thousands of miles. This infrastructure was vital for managing a sprawling empire that now stretched from the Pacific to the Mediterranean. The Mongol World War, a 50-year period of unprecedented conquest and global integration from 1211 to 1261,
saw the vast Mongol armies reshape the very fabric of civilizations across continents. One of the most devastating and transformative campaigns of this era was Hulagu Khan's sweep through the Middle East, a brutal onslaught that would ultimately dismantle powerful ancient states and usher in a new geopolitical order. Genghis Khan's grandson, Hulagu, embarked on his mission in 1253, at a time when the Mongol Empire, having reached its zenith under Mongol Khan, was poised to expand its influence further. Hulagu, a formidable military leader, trained under the tutelage of skilled generals and influenced by his mother Sorkoktani's strategic acumen, was tasked with subjugating the western territories of the empire. His campaign was not merely a military expedition. It was a deliberate reshaping of the political and cultural landscape of the Middle East, a region then comprised of wealthy and sophisticated, yet internally fractured civilizations. Hulagu's initial objective was to quell the formidable power of the Nizari Ismailis, a Shiite Muslim sect more infamously known in the West as the Assassins. For centuries, these Ismailis had wielded immense influence through a sophisticated network of mountain fortresses, most notably the impregnable Alamut, the Eagle's Nest. Their power stemmed from a potent combination of religious devotion to their infallible leader, the Grand Master, and a highly effective system of terror and assassination, often fueled by myths of hashish-induced paradise. While previous Mongol incursions had seen some of these fortresses submit, by the time Hulagu arrived, the sect had regained considerable strength in the vacuum left by earlier Mongol campaigns. The Grand Master, a figure increasingly characterized by debauchery and incompetence, was ultimately murdered by his own followers, only to be succeeded by an equally incapable son. Hulagu, understanding the strategic importance of eliminating this defiant element, employed a multifaceted approach. He launched devastating military assaults against their mountain strongholds, using his engineers to build bridges and siege engines, and his vast army to scale seemingly impassable cliffs. Simultaneously, he offered clemency to those who surrendered, a tactic that proved effective in breaking the sect's resolve. Crucially, Hulagu managed to capture the Grand Master himself, parading him from fortress to fortress to order their submission. The final act of eliminating the Ismailis was a grim affair, with the Grand Master ultimately being killed in Mongolia, far from his Persian strongholds, a testament to the vast reach of Mongol power. With the elimination of the assassins, Hulagu's path was cleared towards his ultimate prize, Baghdad, the glittering heart of the Abbasid Caliphate. For over 500 years, Baghdad had been the undisputed center of the Muslim world, a beacon of learning, culture, and wealth. The Abbasid Caliph, al-Mustasim, however, proved to be a tragically flawed leader, caught between internal divisions and an utter miscalculation of the Mongol threat. While the Caliph had sworn nominal allegiance to Genghis Khan, his subsequent actions, refusing to provide troops against the assassins and, more critically, publicly insulting and mutilating Mongol envoys, sealed his and his city's fate. Hulagu, initially seeking to assert Mongol authority and enforce existing treaties, was provoked by the Caliph's defiance into a full-scale invasion. Hulagu's approach to Baghdad in 1258 showcased a refinement of Mongol siege warfare. His army, significantly augmented by vassal troops and a sophisticated engineering corps, employed a combination of traditional tactics and newly acquired technologies. They encircled the city, diverted the Tigris River to flood its defenses, and unleashed a terrifying bombardment with gunpowder-based weapons, fire lances, and massive catapults.
The psychological impact of this assault, coupled with the caliph's inability to rally effective resistance from a populace already divided by internal strife and religious tensions, proved insurmountable. After a month-long siege, Baghdad capitulated. The aftermath of Baghdad's fall was catastrophic. While Hulagu extended special protection to the Christian and Jewish communities within the city, thanks to the influence of his Christian wives and the diplomatic overtures he had made, the Muslim population and the Abbasid dynasty faced annihilation. Hulagu's soldiers, aided by some of Baghdad's Christian inhabitants who saw an opportunity for revenge against their Muslim rulers, systematically plundered the city for 17 days, setting it ablaze. The Caliph himself, along with his male heirs, was executed in a manner befitting the Mongol aversion to bloodshed, likely by being rolled in carpets and trampled to death by horses. The destruction of Baghdad marked not only the end of the Abbasid Caliphate, but also a devastating blow to the cultural and intellectual heritage of the Islamic world. Cities across Persia, Syria, and Mesopotamia, from Merv to Nishapur, suffered similar fates, their populations decimated, their irrigation systems destroyed, and their libraries burned. Hulagu's campaign, while brutal, was driven by a strategic vision to eliminate centers of resistance and to reshape the region to serve the economic and political interests of the burgeoning Mongol Empire, solidifying control over crucial Silk Road trade routes. This devastating conquest, however, also sowed the seeds for future conflicts, as demonstrated by the Mamluk victory over Hulagu's army at Ain Jalut in 1260. A crucial turning point that marked the limit of Mongol expansion into the Levant.
Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, ascended to the apex of the vast Mongol Empire, inheriting a world transformed by his grandfather's conquests. Yet Kublai's rise and his most significant achievement, the conquest of China and the establishment of the Yuan dynasty, were not merely a continuation of the Mongol war machine, but a sophisticated, calculated fusion of Mongol military might with the very civilization they had conquered. His genius lay not in replicating Genghis Khan's raw military power, but in understanding that ruling China, the most populous and ancient civilization of its time, required more than conquest. It demanded assimilation, adaptation, and ultimately a redefinition of Mongol identity. Genghis Khan had initiated the Mongol campaign against the Jurchen rulers of North China, known as the Jin dynasty, in 1211. This initial phase was marked by traditional Mongol warfare, swift cavalry, devastating psychological tactics, and the exploitation of internal divisions. Genghis Khan, a pragmatic warrior, even recognized the value of Chinese engineering, incorporating siege engines and military strategists into his army. He also demonstrated a surprising diplomatic acumen, restoring the Khitan monarchy as a vassal state to further fracture the Jin. However, Genghis Khan's ultimate goal was not necessarily the administration of these conquered territories, but the acquisition of their vast wealth and resources. His campaigns were largely raids, albeit on an unprecedented scale, driven by the need for trade goods to sustain his people and fuel further expansion. It was Kublai Khan, however, who truly understood the long-term implications of ruling over such a vast and sophisticated civilization. Recognizing that mere military dominance would not suffice, Kublai embarked on a deliberate strategy to win the hearts and minds of the Chinese people. He understood that the dream of a unified China, cherished by its intellectuals for centuries, was a powerful force that he could harness. Unlike his nomadic ancestors, who often disdained sedentary life,
Kublai embraced it, building a grand capital at Khanbalik, the modern Beijing. He commissioned its construction with a unique blend of Mongol and foreign architectural styles, creating a city that was both a testament to Mongol power and an accommodation to Chinese aesthetics. His capital was a world in miniature, a cosmopolitan hub where merchants, scholars, and artisans from across Eurasia mingled, fostering an unprecedented exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. Kublai Khan actively sought to Sinicize his image and administration. He adopted Chinese administrative practices, reformed the legal code to be milder than the preceding Sung dynasty, and established public schools to promote literacy among all levels of society, a radical departure from China's traditional emphasis on elite education. He recognized the importance of a stable and accessible legal framework, streamlining and often humanizing the existing Chinese laws, and even instituting a system of professional, salaried administrators instead of the traditional reliance on scholarly officials who often extorted their subjects. His legal reforms included fingerprinting for record-keeping and a system of parole, demonstrating a surprisingly modern approach to governance. He also introduced a unified paper currency and reformed the calendar system, reflecting a commitment to order and standardization across his vast empire. Kublai Khan fostered a policy of religious tolerance, a principle inherited from Genghis Khan, but implemented with far greater nuance and practicality by Kublai. He allowed various religions to flourish, even supporting their institutions through tax exemptions and patronage. This tolerance, combined with his administrative reforms and the economic prosperity generated by the vast Mongol trading network, helped to gradually win over the Chinese populace. He didn't seek to impose Mongol culture forcefully, but rather to create a hybrid system that incorporated the strengths of both Mongol administration and Chinese civilization. However, Kublai Khan's ambition also extended beyond China's borders. He sought to dominate the seas as well as the land, launching massive naval expeditions against Japan and Java. While these campaigns ultimately failed due to logistical challenges and unfamiliarity with naval warfare, they highlighted the Mongols' adaptability and their transition from land-based conquerors to oceanic powers, foreshadowing the maritime empires of Europe that would emerge centuries later. Kublai Khan's conquest of China and the founding of the Yuan dynasty was a monumental achievement that fundamentally reshaped the Eurasian world. He not only united China under a single rule for the first time in centuries, but also integrated it into a vast, interconnected empire that facilitated trade, communication, and cultural exchange on an unprecedented scale. His reign ushered in an era of relative peace and prosperity, the Pax Mongolica, that laid the groundwork for many of the economic, technological, and intellectual advancements that would characterize the modern world. Kublai Khan, the grandson who learned from his grandfather's military genius and tempered it with shrewd political and administrative skill, proved that true conquest lay not just in defeating armies, but in winning the allegiance of the people.
For all their terrestrial dominion, the Mongols discovered that the vast oceans presented a barrier that even their formidable cavalry could not surmount. The horse, the very engine of their unparalleled conquests, was useless against the boundless expanse of the sea. Twice, in the twilight of Genghis Khan's own life and later under his grandson Kublai, the Mongol war machine turned its gaze towards the islands of Japan and Java, seeking to extend their already colossal empire. Twice, these ambitious ventures met with catastrophic failure, revealing the fundamental limits of Mongol power
when confronting the unpredictable and unforgiving forces of the ocean. The first attempt, launched in 1274, was a colossal undertaking orchestrated by Kublai Khan. He assembled an armada of unprecedented size, comprising nearly 900 ships to transport an army of 23,000 Korean and Chinese infantry, alongside an unknown number of Mongol horsemen. This vast fleet sailed from Korea, aiming for the shores of Japan, a nation that had consistently rebuffed Mongol overtures of submission. The Mongols, accustomed to swiftly crushing land-based opposition, found the maritime endeavor fraught with challenges from its inception. Their ships, hastily constructed with shortcuts in their design, lacked the seaworthiness and robust construction necessary for traversing the treacherous waters between Korea and Japan. Upon reaching Hakata Bay on the island of Kyushu, the Mongol forces landed. They encountered fierce resistance from the Japanese samurai, who, while accustomed to individual combat, found themselves outmatched by the Mongols' disciplined, cohesive tactics. The Mongols bombarded the samurai with exploding missiles and a hail of arrows, easily overcoming their initial land resistance. However, the Mongols did not pursue the Japanese inland, a strategic decision that remains a subject of historical debate. Perhaps they underestimated the Japanese resolve. Perhaps they were damaged more than they appeared. Or perhaps they simply lacked reliable intelligence of the interior. Whatever the reason, they reloaded their men, horses, and supplies onto their ships that night. It was then that fate intervened. A sudden, violent storm, later immortalized in Japanese history as the kamikaze, or the divine wind, descended upon the Mongol fleet. The tempest churned the seas, shattering the poorly built Mongol ships against the rocky shores and unleashing a devastating toll. An estimated 13,000 invaders perished, most succumbing to the unforgiving sea. Despite this crushing defeat, the Mongols, ever pragmatic, interpreted the outcome through their own cultural lens. They declared the brief land battle a success, focusing on the defeat of the samurai rather than the catastrophic loss of their fleet. Kublai Khan, ever the strategist, dispatched further envoys to Japan the following year, demanding the personal submission of the Japanese emperor. This audacious demand, coupled with the outright execution of the Mongol envoys by the Japanese authorities, only fueled Kublai's resolve. He began preparing a second, even larger invasion. This second attempt, launched in 1281, was truly staggering in its ambition. The Mongols assembled an armada of 3,500 ships, carrying 60,000 sailors and 100,000 soldiers, a force far greater than the first expedition. This time they sailed in August, hoping the summer weather would be more favorable. However, Mongol planning and execution at sea, a domain still largely alien to them, proved tragically inadequate. The Chinese fleet, comprising the bulk of the armada, encountered numerous delays, leaving the Korean fleet, which arrived first, stranded in Hakata Bay. Hampered by Japanese defensive walls that prevented a landing, and plagued by a lack of provisions and the outbreak of disease in the sweltering heat, the Korean fleet eventually withdrew. When the Chinese fleet finally arrived, already weakened and suffering from illness, another devastating typhoon swept through the bay, capsizing and destroying ships. Estimates suggest that over 100,000 men perished in this second, even more calamitous disaster. Kublai Khan's ambitions also extended to the south, to the island of Java in modern-day Indonesia. In 1298, he sent an envoy demanding submission, but the Javanese king, fearing the loss of control over the lucrative spice trade, defiantly branded the Mongol envoy's face and sent him back. In response, Kublai prepared another fleet, this time of 1,000 ships and 20,000 soldiers, ready to launch an invasion in 1293. While they initially achieved some success, killing the offending king, the Mongols were ultimately lured into a trap, suffering heavy casualties
and retreating in humiliation. These failures, particularly against Japan, marked a pivotal moment. They demonstrated that while Mongol military organization and strategy were supreme on land, their inability to master the complexities of naval warfare, combined with the unpredictable power of the sea, created an insurmountable obstacle. The failed invasions of Japan and Java, alongside the earlier repulse by the Egyptian Mamluks at Ain al-Jalut, which marked the southwestern limit of Mongol expansion, effectively defined the geographical boundaries of the Mongol Empire. Though Mongol influence and trade networks would continue to flourish, the dream of a world empire stretching across every continent and encompassing every sea found its ultimate limit at the water's edge. The hooves of the Mongol horses could conquer continents, but the vastness of the oceans remained unconquered, a stark reminder that even the greatest empire had its boundaries.
The Mongol Peace, Pax Mongolica, a century of unprecedented global interconnection. For nearly a century after the death of Genghis Khan, the vast Mongol Empire, stretching from the Pacific to the Mediterranean, fostered an era of unprecedented global interconnection. While the initial shock of conquest had been immense, the Mongol administration, driven by Genghis Khan's founding principles, transformed warfare-ravaged lands into conduits of peace, commerce, and cultural exchange. This period, later termed the Pax Mongolica, witnessed the revival and expansion of ancient trade routes, the Silk Road, under a unified and secure umbrella, leading to a global awakening that profoundly shaped the trajectory of civilizations worldwide. Genghis Khan himself, despite his reputation as a ruthless conqueror, laid the groundwork for this peace by establishing fundamental laws that prioritized order and stability. He mandated religious freedom across his realms, fostering a climate where diverse faiths could coexist, and even supported the construction of religious sites for various faiths. His creation of the first international postal system, the Yuan, and his promotion of a standardized alphabet for all languages fostered unprecedented communication across vast distances. By abolishing internal borders for merchants and lowering taxes, he effectively created history's largest free trade zone, revitalizing stagnant trading towns and connecting civilizations that had previously known little of each other. This era saw the unprecedented transfer of technologies and ideas. German miners were brought to China, and Chinese doctors traveled to Persia, facilitating a cross-pollination of skills and knowledge. Innovations like gunpowder, printing, the compass, and the abacus, originating in China, flowed west, sparking a revolution in warfare, navigation, and calculation. Conversely, lemons and carrots traveled from Persia to China, and noodles, playing cards, and tea journeyed from China to the West. These exchanges, from the monumental to the trivial, fostered not just economic growth, but also intellectual curiosity and innovation. The Mongol administrative system, though rooted in nomadic traditions, proved remarkably adaptable. Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, built upon these foundations, establishing a paper currency for empire-wide use and attempting to create universal basic education. He sponsored the most extensive maps ever assembled and encouraged exploration, expanding the empire's commercial and diplomatic reach as far as Africa.
The initial destruction wrought by conquest was often swiftly followed by a significant rise in cultural communication, expanded trade, and an overall improvement in civilization. Europe, in particular, benefited immensely from the Pax Mongolica. While initially suffering the shock of Mongol invasions, Europe ultimately acquired the technologies and knowledge that fueled its renaissance. The adoption of printing, firearms, the compass, and the abacus from the East fundamentally altered European society, driving advancements in warfare, navigation, commerce, and intellectual life. Even everyday aspects of European life, from clothing and musical instruments to artistic styles, were transformed by Mongol influence. Geoffrey Chaucer's admiration for Genghis Khan, as expressed in The Squire's Tale, reflects the awe and respect that the Mongol achievements inspired, a stark contrast to the later barbarian stereotypes that would emerge. The Mongol Empire, though vast and encompassing diverse peoples, was not merely an instrument of conquest, it was a catalyst for global awakening. The sustained peace fostered by Mongol rule allowed for the free flow of people, goods, and ideas across continents, breaking down ancient barriers and weaving together the disparate threads of human civilization into a more interconnected world. This legacy of unprecedented global exchange, initiated by the Mongol conquests and sustained through the Pax Mongolica, laid crucial groundwork for the modern world.
The Mongol Empire, forged in the crucible of steppe warfare by Genghis Khan, did not simply vanish with his death. Instead, it transformed, evolving under his descendants into an unprecedented force that reshaped global civilization. The man who truly embodied this transition, guiding the empire into a new era of Pax Mongolica, was Kublai Khan. His reign marked a profound shift from conquest to consolidation, from a nomadic war machine into a sophisticated, albeit complex, imperial administration that laid the groundwork for the modern world. Kublai understood that to rule China, the most populous and ancient civilization his grandfather had begun to conquer, he needed more than just Mongol armies. He needed to understand and adapt to Chinese culture, to embody its ideals, and to integrate its people into his vision of a united empire. Unlike Genghis Khan, who maintained his nomadic lifestyle and abhorred sedentary ways, Kublai embraced Chinese traditions, adopting Chinese titles, commissioning Chinese-style palaces and temples, and ultimately founding a Chinese dynasty, the Yuan, in 1271. His new capital, Konbalik, or Dadu, the Great Capital, later known as Beijing, was a testament to this syncretic approach, blending Mongol military needs with Chinese urban planning and artistic sensibilities. It was a true world capital, a melting pot where merchants, scholars, and artisans from across Eurasia converged, fostering an exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies on an unprecedented scale. Kublai's genius lay in his ability to adapt, not merely to conquer. He recognized the limitations of Mongol military might when applied to the vast and complex societies of China. Instead, he prioritized a strategy of winning over the population through intelligent governance. He reformed the legal code, making it milder and more systematic than that of the Sung dynasty he overthrew. He reduced the number of capital offenses, substituted fines for physical punishment where possible, and showed a remarkable restraint in the use of torture. He encouraged the printing of books, patronized drama and popular culture, and even attempted to create a universal alphabet to bridge linguistic divides.
His commitment to universal education, establishing public schools for all children, foreshadowed modern educational systems by centuries. This embrace of diverse cultures and technologies was not merely for show. Hubli understood the power of information and the necessity of a functioning economy. He meticulously reformed the paper currency system, stabilizing its value and encouraging trade, a move that dramatically eased commerce across the vast empire. He expanded the postal relay system, the ortu or yam, making travel and communication safer and faster than ever before. He commissioned new maps, synthesized geographical knowledge from Chinese, Arab, and Greek sources, and promoted the development of navigational tools like the compass, paving the way for later European maritime exploration. The creation of the Office for the Stimulation of Agriculture and the introduction of new crops and farming techniques transformed agricultural productivity, while his patronage of medicine, astronomy, and mathematics fostered intellectual growth across continents. The Mongol Empire under Kublai became a conduit for cultural diffusion. Technologies like printing, gunpowder, and the compass, originating in China and the East, flowed into Europe, profoundly influencing the Renaissance. Conversely, knowledge from the Middle East and Europe, including medical practices and scientific instruments, found its way to China. Kublai's administration, staffed by a diverse array of individuals from across his empire, Chinese, Mongols, Muslims, Christians, and even Europeans like Marco Polo, facilitated this cross-cultural pollination. This era of unprecedented exchange and interconnectedness, the Pax Mongolica, laid the foundations for the modern world system, characterized by global commerce, technological innovation, and interconnected societies. However, the very success of Kublai Khan in building this new world order also contained the seeds of its eventual fragmentation. While he maintained a semblance of Mongol identity within the confines of his forbidden city in Konbalik, his administration and imperial policies increasingly reflected a Chinese bureaucratic model. This dual identity, while crucial for his conquest of China, also sowed the seeds of future division. The vast empire, unified by Mongol military might and Kublai's administrative genius, was too diverse to remain a single entity indefinitely. The very systems he implemented, the diverse legal codes, the regional administrations, and the distinct cultural quotas in official appointments, inadvertently laid the way for the empire's eventual splintering after his death. Kublai Khan's legacy is therefore of profound paradox. He was a Mongol who conquered China by becoming more Chinese than the Chinese, a conqueror who fostered peace and prosperity, and a nomadic leader who built a sophisticated urban capital and a universal culture. His reign demonstrated that true power lay not just in military might, but in the ability to adapt, to integrate, and to build enduring institutions that benefited all peoples under his rule, however disparate their origins. He transformed the Mongol legacy from one of terror to one of connection, creating a bridge between East and West that irrevocably shaped the course of human history.
For centuries, Eurasia had been a tapestry of fragmented civilizations, each largely unaware of the others beyond its immediate neighbors. China knew nothing of Europe, and Europe knew nothing of China. The vast distances and the formidable barriers of geography and culture meant the journeys from one end of the old world to the other were practically non-existent. Then came the Mongols. Genghis Khan, a figure of immense, almost unimaginable transformative power, did more than redraw the political map of the world. He fundamentally rewove the fabric of human connection across continents.
While his armies were instruments of unprecedented military might, the legacy they carried was not solely one of conquest, but of unparalleled cultural transmission. As the Mongol cavalry thundered across Eurasia, they became conduits for ideas, technologies, artistic styles, and intellectual currents, forging a network of exchange that laid the groundwork for our modern world. The Mongol Empire, stretching from the Pacific to the Mediterranean, created history's largest free trade zone. This unprecedented connectivity facilitated not just the movement of goods, but the dynamic transfer of knowledge. German miners were brought to China, Chinese doctors found their way to Persia, and techniques from Paris to Persia found new applications across the vast dominion. The exchange was profound, ranging from the monumental to the seemingly trivial, yet each element contributed to the burgeoning global awakening. Carpets, once regional specialties, were spread everywhere. Lemons and carrots traveled from Persia to China, while noodles, playing cards, and tea made their journey from China westward. A metalworker from Paris helped build a fountain on the Mongolian steppe. An English nobleman served as an interpreter, and the practice of Chinese fingerprinting made its way to Persia. This was not merely an accidental byproduct of conquest. The Mongols, driven by an eclectic internationalist zeal, sought to institute a global order. Their ambition extended to creating a universal alphabet, reforming calendars for greater accuracy, and sponsoring the most extensive cartography ever assembled. Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, championed the use of paper currency for empire-wide use and envisioned primary schools to make all children literate. The Mongols' administrative genius lay in their ability to recognize and adapt the strengths of each conquered civilization, integrating them into a new, cohesive system. This fusion of cultures had a profound impact on artistic and intellectual life. The sophisticated technologies of Chinese siege warfare, combined with Muslim advancements and European metal casting techniques, famously led to the development of the cannon, an innovation that fundamentally altered the nature of warfare. But beyond weaponry, the exchange of ideas spurred artistic and intellectual creativity. The Mongols sponsored the building of Christian churches in China, Buddhist temples in Persia, and Muslim Quranic schools in Russia, demonstrating a remarkable commitment to religious freedom and fostering a unique intermingling of faiths. Artistic styles blended as well. Persian miniaturists portrayed figures in Turkish dress, while Chinese artists rendered Mongol rulers in the styles of their own revered sages. European artists, in turn, adopted Mongol fabrics, incorporating their vibrant colors and rich textures into their work, even depicting biblical figures in traditional Mongol attire and featuring the distinctive Mongol script on their canvases. This cross-pollination fueled the burgeoning artistic movements that would characterize the Renaissance. As Roger Bacon, the 13th century English scientist, observed, the Mongols' success stemmed not just from martial superiority, but from their science. They devoted their leisure to the principles of philosophy, and through this intellectual curiosity, they propelled the transfer of knowledge across Eurasia. This transmission of ideas, technologies, and artistic principles, facilitated by the vast interconnectedness forged by the Mongol Empire, represented a truly global awakening, forever altering the trajectory of human history. The golden light of this exchange illuminated a path towards a more interconnected and intellectually vibrant world.
The immense edifice of the Mongol Empire, forged through unparalleled military might and a relentless pursuit of expansion, was not destined to endure in its unified form for eternity. While Genghis Khan had laid a foundation of law, administration, and a truly global network of exchange, the seeds of its eventual fragmentation and the subsequent distortion of its legacy were sown even within his lifetime and would flourish in the centuries following his death. The very scale of the empire, stretching from the Pacific to the Mediterranean, a vast tapestry woven with diverse peoples and cultures, contained inherent tensions. Following the death of the empire's unifier, the reins of power passed to his sons and grandsons. While initially held together by the sheer force of Genghis Khan's charisma and the administrative structures he established, the immense wealth and geographic expanse of the empire soon began to strain its unity. The sheer logistical challenge of governing such a vast dominion, coupled with the emerging rivalries among Genghis Khan's descendants, began to fracture the once indivisible whole. Power struggles, particularly among the sons and grandsons, simmered and, at times, erupted into open conflict. The inherited lands and the spoils of conquest became objects of bitter dispute, creating fault lines that would eventually divide the empire into separate, often warring khanates. This internal strife, however, was not the sole catalyst for the empire's transformation. As the Mongol rulers became more entrenched in the sedentary civilizations they had conquered, particularly in China and Persia, they began to adopt the very cultures they had once subjugated. Kublai Khan, for instance, famously embraced Chinese administrative practices and established a capital at Khanbalik, later Beijing, effectively becoming more Chinese than Mongol in his public persona. This adoption of local customs and the establishment of distinct regional courts, the Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Golden Horde in Russia, and the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, while initially a pragmatic approach to governance, inadvertently weakened the central authority and the shared Mongol identity. The very efficiency of the Mongol system, which had facilitated the swift transfer of goods, technologies, and ideas, also served as an unwitting conduit for disaster. The Black Death, originating in China, traveled along the meticulously maintained Mongol trade routes, decimating populations across Eurasia. This catastrophic pandemic, a direct consequence of the empire's unprecedented interconnectedness, crippled economies, destabilized societies, and profoundly impacted the psychological landscape of the conquered peoples. The sheer scale of death and disruption fostered a climate of fear and suspicion, where the very instruments of Mongol communication and trade became instruments of destruction. As the empire fragmented and the Black Death ravaged its populace, the once unified Mongol identity began to erode. The descendants of Genghis Khan, ruling in their respective khanates, increasingly assimilated into their subject cultures. Persian historians adopted the administrative and literary styles of the lands they governed, while Chinese culture deeply influenced Kublai Khan's court. This assimilation, while perhaps necessary for effective governance, also diluted the distinct Mongol character that had originally swept across the continent. Crucially, the Mongols' deliberate policy of meritocracy and their adoption of diverse administrative and technological practices from conquered lands meant that they left behind a legacy of systems rather than a singular monolithic culture. While they didn't impose a uniform Mongol way of life, they facilitated an unprecedented exchange that reshaped the world. This cultural diffusion, however, also meant that the memory of the Mongols became intertwined with the histories of the very civilizations they had conquered. In the centuries that followed the integration of the empire, the narrative of the Mongols underwent a profound transformation, particularly in Europe. Where early encounters, like those chronicled by Matthew Paris, spoke of terrifying monsters and cannibals, later centuries, especially during the Enlightenment and the rise of colonial powers, began to portray the Mongols as the antithesis of European civilization. Philosophers like Montesquieu and Voltaire used the image of the Mongols as a foil to champion European ideals of liberty and enlightenment, contrasting the supposed servile spirit of Asia with the supposed freedom of Europe. This negative portrayal intensified with the rise of scientific racism in the 19th century. Classifications that linked Asian populations to Mongoloid features, and even evolutionary theories that deemed Asians as arrested infants, fueled a prejudiced view of the East. The historical reality of Genghis Khan, a pragmatic leader who fostered trade, codified law, and created a vast, relatively peaceful empire, was buried under layers of fear, ignorance, and deliberate distortion. The Barbarian label became a convenient tool to justify European colonial ambitions, painting Genghis Khan and his descendants as inherently inferior and backward, a stark contrast to the supposed superiority of Western civilization. This empire of illusion was constructed not from the true actions of the Mongols, but from the fears and biases of those who sought to dominate them. The Mongol legacy, once a force for global integration, was twisted into a narrative of Asian savagery, a projection of European anxieties that would have devastating consequences for generations to come.
The Black Death, the plague as an unintended consequence of Mongol commerce. For centuries, the vast Mongol Empire, stretching from the Pacific to the Mediterranean, was the largest contiguous land empire in history. It connected disparate civilizations, fostering trade, cultural exchange, and technological diffusion. Yet, this unprecedented global network, born from the military genius of Genghis Khan and his successors, carried within it the seeds of devastation, an unintended consequence that would forever alter the course of human history. The Mongol Empire, by its very nature, was a triumph of mobility and communication. The sophisticated Ortu system, a network of postal relay stations, allowed for the swift movement of messages, people, and goods across thousands of miles. This intricate system, initially designed for military and administrative purposes, quickly became the lifeblood of a burgeoning intercontinental commerce. Caravans laden with silks, spices, precious metals, and exotic technologies from the East flowed towards the West, while goods from Persia and the Middle East traveled eastward. This vibrant exchange, however, created an unforeseen hazard. The very roads and relay stations that facilitated the movement of goods also became conduits for a far deadlier cargo: the plague. The bacterium Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas that infested rats, found an ideal pathway through the Mongol Empire's interconnected arteries. Rats, nesting in the abundant food stores and goods transported across the vast distances, whether in sacks of grain, bales of silk, or the personal belongings of travelers, were unknowingly transported alongside merchants, soldiers, and artisans. The Mongol military campaigns themselves had unwittingly played a role in this biological transfer. As armies moved across continents, they carried not only soldiers and weapons, but also the necessary logistics, including vast herds of animals and their associated pests. While the Mongols' nomadic lifestyle and their use of fire and horses offered some natural deterrence to fleas in their homeland, the densely populated cities and sedentary settlements of their conquered territories provided a perfect breeding ground. The plague, originating in the plague reservoirs of the Tian Shan Mountains and possibly the southern regions of China, began its insidious journey along the Mongol trade routes. Archaeological evidence from flea-infested rat bones found near Mongol trading posts paints a grim picture of these unwitting vectors.
By 1338, barely a decade after the death of Genghis Khan, the plague had crossed the Tian Shan Mountains, decimating a Christian trading community in Kyrgyzstan. The plague was, in essence, an epidemic of commerce. The interconnectedness fostered by the Mongol Empire, which had brought unprecedented prosperity and exchange, now served to propagate a deadly pandemic. Fleas, hitching rides on the very goods that symbolize the empire's success, silks, spices, precious jewels, traveled from one camp to another, from village to village, city to city, and ultimately from continent to continent. The ships that carried Mongol goods across the seas, particularly those used by Italian merchants like the Genoese, proved to be efficient incubators for the disease, allowing humans, rats, and fleas to mingle in close quarters, free from the deterrence of horses and open fires. The port city of Kaffa in the Crimea, a vital trading post for Russian slaves and Italian merchants, became a notorious early hotspot. Around 1345, as the Mongol army of the Golden Horde besieged Kaffa, plague erupted within their ranks. A single, though possibly apocryphal European account claims the Mongol Khan Yanibeg had the bodies of his plague-ridden soldiers catapulted over the city walls, intentionally spreading the disease. While the story of deliberate biological warfare is debated, the impact was undeniable. The plague leapt from the Mongol camp into the city, and from there, fleeing ships carried it across the Mediterranean. By 1348, the Black Death had ravaged the cities of Italy and entered England by June. It spread relentlessly, reaching Greenland by the winter of 1350, likely contributing to the final extinction of the struggling Viking colony. In the decades that followed, estimates suggest a devastating decline in global population, with Africa and Asia losing tens of millions and Europe losing as much as a third to a half of its population. The plague was a stark and brutal consequence of the interconnected world the Mongols had forged. It brought about the collapse of the established social order, decimated urban populations and skilled craftspeople, and severely disrupted trade and communication. The very systems that had facilitated the Pax Mongolica, the vast network of roads, relay stations, and flourishing commerce, now became the pathways for the Black Death, demonstrating the profound and unintended consequences of the Mongol legacy on the global stage. The empire that had connected the world in its pursuit of trade and dominance had also inadvertently unleashed a force that would reshape the very fabric of human civilization.
The long shadow of Genghis Khan. From Renaissance Europe to modern Asia, Genghis Khan's legacy extends far beyond the battlefield and the collapse of his empire. While his military conquests redrew the map of the world, his true impact lies in the unprecedented cultural and technological exchange he unleashed, an awakening that profoundly shaped the trajectory of civilizations from Renaissance Europe to modern Asia. At a time when the Old World was a series of isolated regional pockets, each with virtually no knowledge of the other, Genghis Khan's empire forged connections that remain unbroken. Before his death in 1227, he had linked China and Europe, two worlds that previously had no concept of each other's existence. He achieved this not through brute force alone, but by dismantling the feudal system of aristocratic privilege and replacing it with a meritocracy based on loyalty and achievement. He transformed the fragmented trading towns of the Silk Route into history's largest free trade zone, lowering taxes and abolishing them for crucial professions like doctors, teachers, and priests. He established the first international postal system and a regular census, ensuring efficient communication and administration across his vast domain. His empire was not a hoarder of wealth, but a distributor, circulating goods and enabling them to re-enter commercial circulation.
His rule was founded on a commitment to international law, derived from his worship of the eternal blue sky, which he believed held ultimate authority over all people. He insisted that rulers, like the humblest herder, be accountable to the law, a revolutionary concept in an era when most rulers considered themselves above it. He championed religious freedom within his realms, demanding only total loyalty from his subjects regardless of their faith. While he abolished torture, he pursued bandits and assassins with relentless vigor. He refused to hold hostages, instituting diplomatic immunity for all envoys, even those from warring nations. The foundations laid by Genghis Khan allowed his empire to grow for another 150 years, and in its wake his descendants continued to rule smaller empires and large nations from Russia and Turkey to India and China for another 7 centuries. Vestiges of his rule endured, with the last ruling descendant, Alim Khan of Bukhara, deposed in 1920. The true genius of Genghis Khan, however, lay in his ability to absorb and adapt the best from the diverse cultures he encountered. His people, though lacking in their own material civilization, became unparalleled carriers of culture. They brought German miners to China and Chinese doctors to Persia. Lemons and carrots traveled from Persia to China, while noodles, playing cards, and tea journeyed from China to the West. They transplanted a metalworker from Paris to build a fountain in Mongolia, recruited an English nobleman as an interpreter, and took the practice of Chinese fingerprinting to Persia. They financed Christian churches in China, Buddhist temples in Persia, and Muslim schools in Russia. This amalgamation of technologies and ideas led to unprecedented innovation. By combining Chinese gunpowder with Muslim flamethrowers and applying European bell-casting technology, they created the cannon, a weapon that revolutionized warfare and birthed the modern arsenal. This internationalist zeal extended to politics and intellect, as the Mongols sought not just to conquer, but to institute a global order based on free trade, a single international law, and a universal alphabet. Kublai Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, introduced paper currency for universal use and attempted to establish primary schools for universal education, aiming to make everyone literate. They refined calendars, creating a 10,000-year calendar of remarkable accuracy, and sponsored the most extensive mapping ever assembled. In Europe, the Mongols' initial destruction yielded to unprecedented rise in cultural communication and expanded trade. Though they did not conquer Europe, the exchange fostered by merchants like the Polo family and envoys to the popes and kings led to the Renaissance. Europe, in rediscovering its own past, also absorbed critical Eastern technologies, printing, firearms, the compass, and the abacus. As the English scientist Roger Bacon observed in the 13th century, the Mongols succeeded through science and by devoting their leisure to philosophy. From warfare and clothing to commerce and music, nearly every aspect of European life was transformed by Mongol influence, even adopting the exclamation "Hooray!" Yet, despite these profound contributions, the image of Genghis Khan in the West became distorted. Unlike any other conqueror, he forbade portraits, sculptures, or coins bearing his likeness, leaving his contemporaries' descriptions tantalizingly vague. As his empire fragmented and subsequent generations wrestled with the atrocities committed by his armies, Genghis Khan became the stereotype of the bloodthirsty barbarian, his alleged crimes magnified while his achievements were forgotten. Voltaire's portrayal of him as the fiery Genghis Khan who lays the fertile fields of Asia waste and a wild Scythian soldier exemplifies this shift. This negative image festered, leading to derogatory classifications like Mongoloid and its association with inferiority and even criminality. The Mongols became scapegoats for the failures of nations, their legacy twisted to explain Russia's technological lag, Persia's decline, India's inability to resist colonization. Despite this distorted legacy, the recovery of the secret history of the Mongols and the opening of Mongolia in the late 19th century began to correct the record. As scholars deciphered the ancient text and explored the forbidden landscapes of Genghis Khan's homeland, a truer picture of his impact emerged. He was not merely a conqueror, but a visionary who, from humble, violent beginnings, forged a new world order. His long shadow stretches across continents, not just in the empires he forged and the battles he won, but in the interconnected world he inadvertently created, a world forever shaped by his enduring legacy.
For centuries, the image of Genghis Khan was distorted, a caricature of a bloodthirsty barbarian conjured by fearful civilizations. He was the symbol of all that lay beyond the civilized pale, a fiery Genghis Khan who lays the fertile fields of Asia waste, as Voltaire famously wrote, a destructive tyrant who proudly treads on the necks of kings. This menacing portrait, painted by generations of scholars and artists projecting their own fears and phobias, bore little resemblance to the man who had, in fact, redrawn the boundaries of the world, redrawing them not in stone, but in nations. Despite the many images and pictures made of him in subsequent years, no portrait of Genghis Khan was made during his lifetime. He never allowed anyone to sculpt his image or engrave his likeness on a coin. The only descriptions from contemporaries are tantalizingly sparse, leaving the world to imagine him as it wished. The original Mongolian documents, the so-called secret history of the Mongols, a treasure trove of Genghis Khan's early life and rise to power, had disappeared, fading into the depths of history even more mysteriously than Genghis Khan's tomb. For centuries, unsubstantiated rumors persisted that information on all aspects of Genghis Khan's life had been written in a secret document by someone close to him. Chinese and Persian scholars referred to its existence, with some claiming to have seen it. Persian historian Rashid al-Din described the writings as an authentic chronicle, written in the Mongolian idiom and letters, but warned that it was guarded in the treasury, hidden and concealed from outsiders. Following the collapse of Mongol rule, most traces of this secret document seemed to have vanished, and in time, many scholars came to believe it was merely a myth. The 20th century, however, brought two crucial developments that allowed for the correction of this historical record. The first was the deciphering of manuscripts containing the valuable lost history of Genghis Khan. Despite the prejudice and ignorance surrounding the Mongols, scholars throughout the centuries had reported occasional encounters with the fabled Mongol text. Like a rare animal thought extinct, these rumored sightings provoked skepticism rather than scholarship. Finally, in the 19th century, a copy of the document written in Chinese characters was found in Beijing. Scholars could read the characters, but the words made no sense, recorded in a code using Chinese characters to represent 13th century Mongolian sounds. They could only read a small Chinese language summary accompanying each chapter, offering tantalizing hints but remaining inexplicable. This document became known as the Secret History of the Mongols. Throughout most of the 20th century, the deciphering of the secret history remained perilous in Mongolia. Communist authorities kept the book from the populace for fear of ideological contamination. Yet an underground scholarly movement grew around it. In nomadic camps across the steppe, whispers of the newfound history spread, offering the Mongols a history told from their own perspective. They were no longer mere barbarians. They had a narrative that revealed their true identity. For the Mongol nomads, the revelations of the secret history seemed to come from Genghis Khan himself, returned to offer hope and inspiration. The second major development occurred unexpectedly in 1990, with the collapse of communism and the end of Soviet occupation in Mongolia. The Soviet army retreated, the planes flew away, and the tanks withdrew. The Mongol world was finally open to outsiders. Gradually, a few people ventured into the protected areas. Mongol hunters poached in the game-filled valleys, and herders grazed their animals along the edges. In the 1990s, technologically sophisticated foreign teams searched for the tombs of Genghis Khan and his family, making fascinating finds but eluding their ultimate goal. My own research began with a study of tribal people in world commerce and the Silk Route. I traveled archaeological sites, libraries, and scholarly meetings across Asia. Beginning in 1990, I pursued the trail of the Mongols through Russia, China, Mongolia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan. I devoted one summer to following the migration path of the Turkic tribes as they spread from Mongolia to Bosnia. Then I circled the old empire by the sea route of Marco Polo. The extensive travel produced information, but not as much understanding as I had hoped. My research took a significant turn when I arrived in Mongolia in 1998. Mongolians were delirious at their freedom from centuries of foreign rule, and much of the excitement centered on honoring the memory of their founding father, Genghis Khan. Despite the commercialization of his name on vodka bottles and cigarettes, as well as songs in his honor, the historical Genghis Khan remained missing. His soul was missing from the monastery, and his true face was still missing from their history as much as from ours. Who was he? For the first time in nearly 8 centuries, the forbidden zone of his childhood and burial was open, and the coded text of the secret history had finally been deciphered. No single scholar could complete the task, but working together with a team from different backgrounds, we could begin to find the answers. As a cultural anthropologist, I collaborated closely with archaeologist Dr. H.L. Lagvasuren, who had access to information collected by his professor, Dr. H. Perle. Through Lagvasuren, I met other researchers who had secretly, and almost always alone, studied the history they could never publish. Professor O. Purev studied shamanist practices to interpret the secret history. Colonel H. Shagdar compared Mongol military strategies with Russian archives. Political scientist D. Bold Erdine analyzed Genghis Khan's techniques for acquiring power. Geographer O. Sukbatar had covered over 1 million kilometers across Mongolia in search of Genghis Khan's history. Our team began comparing primary and secondary texts from a dozen languages with the secret history, debating meanings and reconciling contradictions. Sukbatar was a literalist, believing every statement in the secret history to be true, while Purev saw symbolic mystery in the text, viewing Genghis Khan as the most powerful shaman in history. We realized the ultimate test of veracity lay in the places where events transpired. Books can lie, but places never do. Entry into Genghis Khan's homeland, the highly restricted area that the Soviets had so tightly sealed, was more than a step back in time. It was an opportunity to discover his world almost precisely as he left it, protected by the worst technological horrors of the 20th century. Clogged with trees and underbrush, much of it remained impenetrable. This restricted region was a living monument to Genghis Khan. As we traveled, it seemed at any moment he might appear galloping up the river or over the ridge to pitch his camp again in the places he had loved. Our research team approached the area like detectives searching a crime scene. With the secret history of the Mongols as our guide, we navigated the landscape, relying heavily on herders accustomed to the steppe. A constantly changing cluster of students, scholars, herders, and horsemen accompanied us, debating answers and asking questions that had never occurred to me. They knew how herders thought, and even in unknown territory, they identified where their ancestors would have camped or traveled. They understood the land intimately, recognizing places with too many mosquitoes for summer camp or too exposed for winter. They were willing to test their ideas, racing horses to gauge travel time or testing river ice thickness. Descriptive place names helped us restore and apply them to the landscape. Gradually, we pieced together the story, correcting misconceptions. Genghis Khan's birthplace, for example, was in a wooded river valley with marshes, not the open steppe where most historians assumed he grew up. This landscape tied his early life more firmly to Siberian cultures than to the Turkic tribes of the plains, influencing our understanding of his field methods and treatment of civilians. This 5-year journey, under varying temperatures and through numerous mishaps, taught me how intimately the Mongols knew their world and how consistently I could trust their judgment, ability, and helpfulness. Their history, so long suppressed and distorted, was finally being brought to light, not just through dusty texts, but through the living landscape and the enduring spirit of the Mongol people.
Genghis Khan's enduring spirit, the unchanged landscape, and the unfinished quest. For centuries, the soul of Genghis Khan was believed to reside in a spirit banner, a sulde, crafted from the hair of his finest stallions, tied to a spear shaft. This banner, erected in the open air beneath the eternal blue sky, was more than a symbol. It was the repository of his spirit, a perpetual guardian and a conduit of power from nature to the warrior. As the hair streamed in the steppe winds, it beckoned Genghis Khan onward, fueling his quest for destiny. When his physical body was surrendered to nature, his spirit lived on, forever inspiring future generations. This profound connection between the man, his banner, and the boundless landscape of his homeland is where we find the enduring spirit of Genghis Khan, a spirit inextricably linked to the very earth that shaped him and the quest that ultimately transcended him. The soul of Genghis Khan, once held for centuries in a Buddhist monastery along the River of the Moon, vanished during the brutal purges of the 1930s. Stalin's forces, driven by an ideological crusade against Mongolian culture and religion, systematically destroyed monasteries, executed monks, and obliterated religious objects. In this wave of destruction, the embodiment of Genghis Khan's soul, his spirit banner, also disappeared, possibly rescued and spirited away, or perhaps tragically destroyed. Yet the true repository of his spirit, as the Mongols understood, was never confined to a single object. It was woven into the fabric of their history, their traditions, and the very landscape of their homeland. Genghis Khan himself was a man forged by the harsh realities of the steppe. Growing up in a world of intense tribal violence, an outcast family left to perish, his childhood was marked by hunger, humiliation, kidnapping, and slavery. He knew no formal education, his world limited to a few hundred people. Yet from these degraded circumstances, a profound instinct for survival and self-preservation emerged. He learned the full spectrum of human emotion, desire, ambition, and cruelty in dreadful detail. He feared dogs and cried easily. His younger brother was stronger, his half-brother more dominant. But within this crucible of adversity, the seeds of an extraordinary destiny were sown. Even as a child, the foundations of his character were laid through two pivotal relationships: an oath of eternal friendship with a boy who would become his closest companion and most dedicated enemy, and the discovery of the girl he would love forever and who would become the mother of emperors. This dual capacity for profound friendship and bitter enmity, forged in the crucible of his youth, would endure throughout his life, projecting his personal goals, desires, and fears onto the grand stage of world history. Year by year, he gradually, painstakingly defeated everyone more powerful than he was, until every tribe on the Mongolian steppe bowed to his will. At 50, when most great conquerors had retired from the battlefield, Genghis Khan's spirit banner beckoned him out of his remote homeland.
He confronted the sophisticated armies of the civilized world that had harassed and enslaved nomadic tribes for centuries. In the remaining years of his life, he followed that banner across vast swaths of Asia, transforming warfare into an intercontinental affair. His innovative techniques rendered heavily armored knights obsolete, replaced by disciplined cavalry units moving in coordinated assaults. Genghis Khan taught his people not only to fight across incredible distances, but to sustain campaigns over years, decades, and eventually generations of constant fighting. His legacy was not etched in stone monuments or grand temples, but in the very creation of nations. Unsatisfied with the fragmentation of smaller kingdoms, Genghis Khan consolidated them into larger, more cohesive entities. In Eastern Europe, the Mongols united a dozen Slavic principalities into a single powerful Russian state. In Eastern Asia, they forged the country of China by weaving together the remnants of disparate kingdoms. As their rule expanded, they created nations like Korea and India, which to this day retain borders remarkably similar to those fashioned by their Mongol conquerors. Genghis Khan's empire connected and amalgamated the myriad civilizations around him into a new world order. At the time of his birth, the Old World was a collection of regional civilizations, each virtually ignorant of its closest neighbor. No one in China knew of Europe, and vice versa. By the time of his death, he had connected them with diplomatic and commercial contacts that remain unbroken to this day. He shattered the feudal system of aristocratic privilege, building a new system based on individual merit, loyalty, and achievement. He organized the disjointed trading towns along the Silk Route into history's largest free trade zone, lowering taxes and abolishing them for vital professions like doctors, teachers, and priests. He established a regular census and created the first international postal system. His empire did not hoard wealth. Instead, it distributed acquired goods back into commercial circulation. He created an international law that held rulers as accountable as the lowest herder, granted religious freedom, abolished torture, and instituted diplomatic immunity for ambassadors, even those from warring nations. His death, in the summer of 1227 during a campaign against the Tenggit nation along the Yellow River, was shrouded in secrecy, as the Mongols abhorred mentioning death or illness. They spoke of him as having ascended into heaven. His body was returned to his homeland and buried anonymously, without a mausoleum, temple, or tombstone, in accordance with Mongol belief that the soul resided in the spirit banner, not the earthly body. The final destination of Genghis Khan's resting place remains unknown, lost to history, obscured by the very landscape that cradled his spirit. Yet the spirit of Genghis Khan endures, not merely in the stories and legends, but in the very land that shaped him. The rolling steppes, the sacred mountains, the winding rivers, these remain largely unchanged, testaments to the enduring connection between the man and his homeland. Even as the modern world intrudes, as roads and bridges are built, and the hushed sanctity of places like Burkhan Khaldun is sometimes disturbed, the essence of that enduring spirit persists. It is a spirit of resilience, of adaptation, of a relentless drive to forge a destiny against all odds, a spirit that continues to echo in the whistling wind across the vast, open plains. A silent testament to the unfinished quest and the man who, against all probability, redrew the boundaries of the world.